here on MeTV, Sioux Falls 13.3.
Tonight, the high-stakes showdown amid the growing COVID outbreak in the White House. Just a short time from now, Mike Pence and Kamala Harris facing off in the only vice presidential debate. For Pence, a chance to shake up the race with 27 days until the election. For Harris, the most important moment of her political career and the drama before the debate. The campaign sparring over plexiglass dividers after Pence's possible exposure to President Trump. And just posted the president's new video message about the experimental treatment he received and saying contracting COVID was a blessing from God as he returns to the Oval Office today while he is still potentially contagious. Stimulus chaos, the president cutting off talks, then hours later a reversal. Where do things stand for millions in desperate need of relief? The alarming COVID surge in a key battleground. Cases on the rise now in over 30 states. Emergency operations and evacuations as Hurricane Delta targets the U.S. after cutting a path of destruction in tourist hotspots. The ISIS terror suspects known as the Beatles brought to the U.S. for trial. Why they won't face the death penalty. And the top U.S. spy hunter, what worries him most about the election.
This is NBC Nightly News, the vice presidential debate. Here is Lester Holt.
Good evening. With new COVID cases on the rise from the White House to the American heartland, Vice President Mike Pence will debate Democratic VP candidate Senator Kamala Harris just hours from now in Utah. The COVID outbreak that has sidelined the president, who was seen in this video released late today, turning up the spotlight for tonight's showdown. Harris, a former prosecutor hoping to make the case against the administration's COVID response. Pence, an experienced debater looking to close ground in the polls. Our Jeff Bennett has a preview.
Tonight, we're just hours away. Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris facing off in an historic debate with suddenly higher stakes, coming as President Trump recovers from coronavirus. All eyes on the vice president's performance, trying to make up ground in national polls, and on Senator Harris, who will be facing the biggest test of her political career. And the debate even more critical, with both serving as understudies to the oldest candidates to ever lead the Republican and Democratic tickets. Both Pence and Harris have spent hours preparing with traditional mock sessions, according to sources familiar.
When the president told me he was headed back to the White House, he told me to head to Utah. And we're looking very much forward to the vice presidential debate.
Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi playing Harris and Pence's practice sessions. The Harris campaign subbing one Indiana native for another, with former Mayor Pete Buttigieg playing Pence.
I want to thank the people of Utah for being so welcoming in such a warm way.
Harris making history as the first woman of color on a major party's national ticket. Her expected target tonight, the president's pandemic response. An issue where polls show voters prefer Joe Biden. Harris, the campaign says, will try to avoid sparring with Pence and instead offer a contrasting vision for the nation. It comes as Biden says there should be no additional presidential debates as long as the president is still infected.
I think if he still has COVID, we shouldn't have a debate.
Meantime, Pence's expected top focus, the economy, arguing the president is best to lead an economic comeback. Polling shows voters give President Trump a slight edge on that issue, and Pence may press Harris to say whether Biden will add justices to the Supreme Court, which he earlier refused to answer.
Vote now. Make sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator.
Even the debate stage is unprecedented, with extra pandemic precautions, including candidates seated 12 feet apart, plus plexiglass partitions. The move, which was requested by the Harris camp, was initially mocked by the vice president's office. If Senator Harris wants to use a fortress around herself, have at it. Pence's team ultimately agreeing late Tuesday, following another positive COVID case at the White House.
And Jeff, I know the candidates are bringing guests tonight. That's giving us a little bit of a hint as to their strategies.
That's right, Lester. The vice president has invited the parents of murdered ISIS hostage Kayla Mueller. They have criticized the Obama administration's handling of ISIS, and Senator Harris has invited Deborah Gatrell. She's a military veteran who's the only Democrat running for the Salt Lake City Council. Lester? All right, Jeff Bennett tonight. Thanks very much, and we want you to join Savannah Guthrie, Chuck Todd, Andrea Mitchell, and me for full coverage of tonight's debate starting at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific time here on NBC. Just 2 days after he left the hospital, President Trump was back in the Oval Office today and releasing a new video saying it was a blessing from God that he got sick because he could experience how well an experimental new treatment works. Peter Alexander has the latest.
President Trump tonight still recovering, but back in the Oval Office for the first time since testing positive for coronavirus. Releasing this video.
Because I feel great. I feel like perfect. So I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it.
Praising the experimental antibody cocktail he received.
It really did a fantastic job. I want to get for you what I got, and I'm going to make it free.
Dr. Sean Conley reports President Trump's been fever-free for more than 4 days, symptom-free for over 24 hours, and that he has not needed nor received any supplemental oxygen since initial hospitalization. His doctor providing few other specifics, including whether President Trump is still taking the steroid dexamethasone to treat the disease.
He's in very good health. We're pleased with his progress.
Earlier, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows hinting the president wanted to get back to the office.
If he decides to go to the Oval, we've got safety protocols there that are not only from a PPE standpoint, but from a ventilation standpoint.
President Trump returns to a West Wing that's like a ghost town, with many staffers either quarantining or working from home. Stephen Miller, the latest aide to become infected. Miller is the 18th White House aide or ally to test positive and part of an indoor cluster that's become a focal point. The president's debate prep sessions, 6 positives in that group, including Hope Hicks, Kellyanne Conway, and Chris Christie. Another focus, that Rose Garden event where some guests were tested, but we saw no social distancing and few masks. Still, Meadows insisting to us today they were taking precautions.
Why didn't the White House perhaps mandate social distancing and mask wearing?
Well, we do mandate social distancing as much as practical, and when we're not, and when we're there, obviously wearing masks when you can't do that.
And late tonight, a first for the New England Journal of Medicine, the nonpartisan medical journal, not naming President Trump, but slamming our, quote, current political leaders as dangerously incompetent, adding that Americans should not allow them to keep their jobs. Lester?
Peter Alexander at the White House, thanks. And millions of Americans are in limbo tonight, facing financial peril as they...
A week and a day ago.
Yes.
And wow.
What a debate.
Talk about a seismic change in what has happened, right? You're now 14 and counting people infected in the White House, the top generals in the country in quarantine. The President of the United States spent 3 days in the hospital with coronavirus, which his own administration thinks he had at that debate.
Right.
And that is now front and center.
And it'll be front and center visually, right? The distance, they're going to be apart, 12 feet or so in the plexiglass as well. And listen, this is what Biden and Harris wanted this debate in this election to be about COVID, and it just so happens that most Americans are dealing with this virus and the fear of this virus in major ways every single day of their lives. So you'll see her bring the case to Pence, who of course is the head of this task force. And I think if you're Pence, you want to try to make the case that they're too liberal and they wouldn't know what they were doing in the White House.
Well, it's always been the COVID election. Now it's the COVID October, and it's blaring red. So it's so important. And I look for Kamala Harris to take the case to the president through Pence. Yeah, Pence runs the task force, but she's going to make the case against a president who said that he downplayed the virus, and then he ultimately gets the virus. And so do so many other people.
Which he says is a blessing.
Within the White House. And now he says it's a blessing. So competence, compassion. I mean, I really think that she's got the ability to drill down on this and take it. I think in her role, it's always to take the case against the president, and the proximate person there is the vice president.
In the big picture tonight, there aren't many opportunities left for a reset. And you look at the data, and the data suggests that this is getting away from the president. 16 points in a national survey from CNN. My home state of Pennsylvania, Monmouth survey now says that what was a 4-point race is now 12 to Biden's advantage. There are just 27 days to go until the final day of voting. So this is that rare opportunity that presents a chance. And I wonder how much pressure Vice President Pence is under from the president to go hard and heavy tonight in this debate, which I don't think is Pence's inclination.
And the way the president has been acting the past couple of days, right, whatever, and he is on some very serious steroids, but I mean the number of tweets, the fast and furious, the sort of live reaction from this president that we're going to see, that's going to be part of the conversation and how this is received.
He has been incredibly erratic. I think if you're Pence, you've got to be the stabilizer. I mean, we saw this last go round with Biden having to be the stabilizer after Obama didn't have such a great debate. So in many ways, Pence, who has a sort of Midwestern, cool, easy sensibility and manner about him, I think that's what you'll see tonight, compared to Harris, who can be the prosecutor. That's right, why people like her.
It's better, it really is, night and day.
With experience.
Right now about politics, and that you can connect with voters on a personal level. We saw her ability to do that in the primary debates, so I think we should expect her to talk about personal experiences.
And finally, a different subject, yet another subject, Yamiche, and that is there was news today out of the Centers for Disease Control. Tell us about that.
That's right. A former director of the CDC wrote a letter to the current director of the CDC, essentially telling him that he should orchestrate his own firing to call attention to what he sees as undue political pressure coming out of the White House and onto the CDC. William Fahey wrote in part that the president essentially should be called out for pushing the CDC to do things that are not right when it comes to science. Now, William Fahey is someone who is seen as a public health expert. He's someone who worked on smallpox and other issues. We don't have a graphic up, but I want to read part of what he said, which is, it's a slaughter, not just a political dispute. So what he was talking about there is the coronavirus pandemic, essentially saying that too many Americans have died and this administration has really not done what it needed to do for the virus. So as a result, he's saying that the CDC really needs to be calling out the president and that the director should be the one speaking up.
So important to hear that. Yamiche Alcindor for us reporting on the White House, Lisa Desjardins reporting on the Capitol and the Biden campaign. Thank you both. And as Yamiche and Lisa have just laid out, negotiators do appear to be a long way from a comprehensive aid deal. While parts of the American economy have recovered better and more quickly than expected, there are signs that millions of people may be without a job for 6 months or longer. That prospect, along with the end of some benefits to individuals and aid to businesses, has some people worried about where all this is heading. You can count Neel Kashkari among them. He is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and he joins me now. Neel Kashkari, welcome back to the NewsHour. I want to cite what we heard yesterday from Fed Chair Jay Powell. He warned of what he called tragic results for the economy if there isn't some sort of robust aid package coming out of Congress in the wake of the pandemic. Today, you used the term enormous consequences if there isn't a significant aid package. What do you mean by that?
Well, Judy, good to see you. There are roughly 11 million Americans who are still out of work today, who've still lost their jobs, and they haven't come back. And that is roughly equal to the worst part of the job market during the great financial crisis. So we are a long way from recovering to where the economy was in January or February. And if you have 11 million Americans who don't have money to pay their bills, to pay their credit card bills, their car payments, their rent, that will then ripple throughout the economy. So if somebody doesn't pay their rent, their landlord then can't pay his or her mortgage, and then the bank is facing losses. And so if this goes on and there's no more assistance provided, it will ripple through the economy. It'll hurt those families directly, but it will hurt the entire U.S. economy and make the recovery much more sluggish.
So in the middle of all this, yesterday, as you know, President Trump abruptly announced that he was wanted to put an end to these talks, trying to reach some sort of an agreement on economic aid. What does that say to you about the president's role in all this?
Well, I think it's vital that the White House and the Congress, both parties, come together. You know, one of the pieces of good news throughout this pandemic is how aggressively the fiscal policymakers came together in the spring to support the American people and to support small businesses. They did exactly the right thing in the spring, and I think all of us are encouraging them to continue that bipartisanship, to do more. the Federal Reserve, we're playing our part, but there are limits to what we can do. We absolutely need the fiscal policymakers to continue to support workers and businesses.
And so your message to them is what? Because as you mentioned, they did come to an agreement in the spring, but for months now, they have not been able to come to an agreement. For months, Republicans, the White House, Leader McConnell have said they've already spent a lot of money. They don't want to spend more money. They're worried about the debt. Whereas the Democrats have argued we need a robust package in order to help people.
We need a robust package. Back in the spring, I think we were all maybe naively optimistic that this would be a short duration of an economic crisis and get the pandemic behind us. That obviously has not happened. It's likely going to be with us for 6 months, 9 months, a year or more until we get to a vaccine that's widely available. And thousands of businesses have already shuttered. If we allow thousands of more businesses to shutter, that's going to slow down our economic recovery, and that's going to diminish our economic potential.
So if you could speak right now, both to Speaker Pelosi, to Leader McConnell, to the President, is that what you'd say to them?
I would say that we are only halfway through this pandemic. The Congress is uniquely empowered, the Congress and the executive branch, to provide this kind of fiscal support that workers and businesses need. Look, if the Federal Reserve does a little more quantitative easing, that's not going to do anything for the person who can't put food on the table or for the small business that is shuttering. But we can provide support to the general economy, but we do not have the ability to provide this support to workers and small businesses that have been affected. Only the White House and Congress can do it, and we would encourage them to come together to do that.
And yet, at the risk of repeating myself, it's been months and they haven't been able to come to an agreement. Why not? I mean, you know Washington, you've worked in Washington, you know the way things work here. What's not getting through?
Well, I don't know. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about where the virus is going, how long this pandemic would last. Again, I think many people were hopeful that back in March, hey, maybe this will be over by June and we can go back to normal. Obviously, that's not the case. The virus is still raging throughout much of the country and climbing in many places, including here in Minnesota. So I think we need to just accept that reality that we are still in the middle of this pandemic and we still need more assistance for workers and for businesses to get to the other side.
And specifically, I'm thinking of Leader McConnell's arguments that we've already spent a lot of money. His argument that there's money that's been sitting on the sidelines, hasn't truly gone where it's supposed to go. He was making that argument a few months ago, and also saying we have to worry about the debt.
This is like a natural disaster that's hit the entire U.S. economy all at once. Imagine a hurricane hitting the whole U.S. economy. The U.S. government has the financial resources to support the American economy and the American people to get through this. This is the time to use those financial resources to get through it. We all agree. I think long term, we absolutely have to get our fiscal house in order. We're going to have to make tough choices. But when you're in the middle of the pandemic, you're in the middle of the hurricane, I believe the right thing to do is to support the economy and to support the American people.
So if these early, just quickly, if these early reports of smaller, isolated forms of aid is what they agree to, is that going to be enough, whether to the airlines and to other specific sectors of the economy?
To me, I think putting money in the hands of the 11 million people who've lost their jobs is of paramount importance. Helping small businesses, we've got thousands that have already failed, thousands more will fail. And also supporting state and local governments. They employ a lot of people. They employ a lot of essential workers like school teachers, and making sure that they are able to continue to do their jobs to support all of us, to support our kids, to support our economic futures. Those are all important.
But I hear you, Neil Kashkari, coming back throughout this to say it all hinges on COVID and when that is behind us.
It would be great if there was a widely available vaccine that we all had confidence in. Then that would be great. We could get vaccinated and we could go back to normal. But the experts have said it's likely going to be late next year before such a vaccine is widely available. And so we have to prepare for that. I mean, I hope it comes sooner, but we need to be realistic and prepare for the fact that we're probably at about the midway point of this pandemic.
Sobering words from the president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, Neil Kashkari. We thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Tonight, Brett and Martha.
Peter, thank you.
So here now with what to expect from Kamala Harris tonight, former presidential candidate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, who has been playing Vice President Pence in the mock debates to get Senator Harris ready for this. Mayor Pete, good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate it. You know, you heard Peter Doocy's piece there outlining a number of flip-flops on Medicare for All, which Senator Harris said she was for, and then she said she was against it. The question of Me Too issues was also a flip-flop there that was laid out, and marijuana as well, in terms of how serious a crime that is. Did you guys work on that in the mock debate scenario?
Well, I'm really looking forward to tonight because I think it's going to be a chance to focus on what the American people are most concerned about. The White House's abject failure to protect the American people from the coronavirus, which has destroyed lives and done such damage to our economy. The failure of the president to keep the American people safe. The refusal of the president to so much as negotiate on a relief package that's going to benefit those who are hurting economically. Look, Mike Pence is a very skilled debater. I know him from the time that we were both serving, him as governor, me as mayor. He was a talk show host for a long time, and he's very comfortable delivering talking points, some of them outrageous, with a straight face. But I'm also looking forward to the opportunity just to have some clarity on the issues that Americans care about most. We want to talk about health care. The most important thing that's about to happen in health care is the question of whether the Republican lawsuit to take away pre-existing condition coverage prevails in a few weeks when it gets to the Supreme Court. That's what Americans are worried about, and that's why I think a lot of people are going to be tuning in this evening.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the stimulus and the stopping of the negotiation and what President Trump tweeted. They say that that stopped because Nancy Pelosi would not come off the $2.2 trillion and included in there some poison pills for Republicans. And they're saying they'll pass, would like to pass some other single-focused bills like checks, stimulus checks directly to families and other things, to airlines. Why not do that?
Well, the House already passed a bill. It's a good bill, and Mitch McConnell won't even put it up for an up or down vote. If they think it's bad, they can vote it down, but it's really revealing that they won't even take it that far.
Well, there's illegal immigrants support in there. It grants protections for employers who hire undocumented immigrants. There's other things that are not tied to the coronavirus specifically that, you know.
Yeah, it's true. When you have employers,
Joe Biden
when you have employers like the Trump
said yesterday that bringing people together was what it should be.
Make sure that they don't get COVID. Right? I mean, you saw the group of undocumented immigrants, for example, who worked for Donald Trump and showed that they actually paid more in taxes than he did. The workplaces that they're in are workplaces where all different people are, and customers too. And I think we would all agree that we want everybody, regardless of their immigration status, to be free of this deadly virus.
So just going back to my original question about the things that, you know, when you run for president, you have a record on all of these issues. And then we've seen that record and her stance on them changing over time. So there's no doubt she's going to be asked about that tonight. Can you give us some insight into what she might say to justify why she was for Medicare for all then and is not for it now, for example?
Well, there's a classic parlor game of trying to find a little bit of daylight between running mates. And if people want to play that game, we could look into why an evangelical Christian like Mike Pence wants to be on a ticket with the president caught with a porn star, or how he feels about the immigration policy that he called unconstitutional before he decided to team up with Donald Trump. If folks want to play that game, we could do it all night. But I think what most Americans want to hear about is, are our families going to be better protected than they have been by this president who's failed to secure America in the face of one of the most dangerous things ever to happen to our country?
Will the question be answered of whether this ticket is for adding justices to the Supreme Court and for ending the filibuster?
Well, as you know, I've always been a fan of bipartisan reforms that reduce the level of politicization in the Senate and on the court, speaking only for myself. What I'll also say is that the entire party, the ticket, and I think most Americans agree that the most important question concerning the court is the nomination that's about to happen. And it's unfortunate that Donald Trump and Mike Pence think the American people are wrong in the view that the vast majority of us have, us meaning, again, the American people, also Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that the next president ought to pick the next Supreme Court justice.
All right, Mayor Buttigieg, we'll see if we get some answers to some of these questions when we watch this all play out tonight on the actual stage. Thank you very much. Good to have you here.
Thanks for the time. How former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker has prepared Vice President Pence for tonight's debate. On the other side, that's next. Keep it here.
Are you okay?
Oh, it's just a cold.
Importantly, Joy, she's got to make people be comfortable with her. You know, we have two guys running for president that, let's face it, are pretty old, both of them. So there is in the back of everyone's mind, are these people ready to be president? So what Kamala has to do is make sure, more important than any point she makes or any jab she has against Pence, she's got to make sure at the end of this debate, people in America go, you know what? I'm comfortable with her. She would be okay making big decisions in this country. That's her challenge, and she's got the skill to do it, and I'm hopeful that she will.
You know, Steve, she's going to be debating a guy who's representing an administration that is the last minute scurrying to try to get the airline industry bailed out. But Donald Trump still hasn't given a real note of sympathy to the other members of the 7 million, and he's one of them, that have the coronavirus. They hosted an event in the White House for families of our fallen troops, and then belatedly said, oh, you know what? That was actually a COVID issue. You might want to maybe get checked up. Like, the treatment of the virus, which is Donald Trump's biggest problem, has been just bananas, just from a raw political point of view. You said in one of the tweets in your tweet thread, your mini tweet thread, when you weren't challenging Donald Trump's intelligence and whether his father loved him and a whole lot of other stuff people should read, that you talk to people inside the campaign that they are panicking internally, and instead of being honest and coming out and talking to the public, they're talking to y'all at the Lincoln Project. What are you hearing in terms of the level of panic inside of Trump world?
Well, it is panic, and there's a difference between panic and fear and stress. But no, it's panic. They know that everybody's lying to them. They're higher ups. They know that Trump has casual disregard from them. They all know that this is going down. The Trump campaign is dark in a lot of the country. They don't have money for TV ads. Right before we learned he was a tax cheater, maybe it was the moments after. It's tough to remember all of it, but the former campaign manager was hauled off to an asylum after being tackled by the police after threatening his wife and hitting her, threatening her with a firearm, tackled on the ground. He's suspected in terms of allegedly stealing $40 million of the campaign's money, right? So everyone in that campaign knows it's going down, and a lot of them are worried, right, that they're never going to get a job again, right, that they'll never work in politics again, maybe outside the Trump organization, but then no company will ever hire them, no nonprofit will ever hire them, no university will ever hire them. They look at some of the people that have come before them, and the name Trump is going to linger around them like a stench, a shame for the rest of their lives, and the days are getting short. And when we hear Donald Trump, by the way, say there won't be a peaceful transition of power, and we hear Donald Trump say that there may be violence if he doesn't win or the election isn't legitimate, how many of these young men and women, how many of these factotum in Washington, D.C. are prepared to cross that final Rubicon with Donald Trump? They've surrendered every principle. They've done everything that he asked them. They have destroyed their reputations. They've done harm to the country. But who will cross that last line with him to try to end the American experiment, to maintain in power a president who was rejected by the popular will of the American people? There will be some of them, and have no doubt that he's going to do everything he can to try to cling to power, but there won't be an end a Trump coup in this country.
Yeah, indeed. All right, we're gonna hold you guys right there. We're gonna keep you guys until the next break. Joe Scarborough, by the way, tweeted this morning that he's hearing from people inside there that God may be making the bill come due for some of the things that they've done. All right, so we're gonna have you guys come back. Meanwhile, growing fears on the Republican side, as we just mentioned, and growing optimism on the Democratic side about the election. Are Democrats about to pay, are Republicans about to pay a huge price for happily mutating into the party of Trump? That's what we're discussing when we come back.
Drier, and so on down the list. But many locations are at least a foot drier than last year. We actually have rain in the forecast. That's for early next week. Along with it, temperatures will be much cooler. For KELO Land Weather, I'm meteorologist Scott.
And here's a look at the
temperatures, you head outside. It's going to be a very pleasant evening. The north breeze we had earlier today has died down even more. But we're still, those temperatures are pretty much all above our normal highs for this time of year. So very mild as we go through the evening. Now tomorrow we'll have a brisk southeast wind. Our temperatures tomorrow about the same, maybe a degree or two warmer. 78 Sioux Falls, 75 Aberdeen, the 80s in western and central KELO land.
All right, thanks, Jay. And that's our time. And thank you for watching. Hope to see you back here tonight at 10.
4 years ago. Right now, the coronavirus is playing out, surging, cases increasing on Donald Trump's 2016 map. Smaller states, not very populous states out here, that was Trump country in 2016. Right now, he said the virus would be gone in April. They are experiencing the coronavirus. One thing you might hear tonight, this is a global crisis. The United States, the president and the vice president often say, we're leading the world. Leading the world, maybe, Anderson, but not in the ways you want to lead the world. Look where we are now. This is the United States versus the European Union, and this is Japan down here. This is the 7-day moving average of newly confirmed cases per 1 million residents. Remember back at the beginning, the United States and the European Union went up the hill at about the same time. Here's the difference. The European Union got down, flattened the curve for a very long time. Yes, the European Union right now, look at the Czech Republic, look at Hungary, look at Spain, look at the Netherlands. They are having a surge, without a doubt. But they pushed the curve down, so as they deal with the surge, the numbers are lower. The United States never got the curve down. Then it went up to the summer surge, and now we're dealing with this. So as the debate plays out tonight, if you're going to say the United States is leading the world, Anderson, this is not the race you want to be leading. And I just want to come back to this map here. If you look at this map right now, 27 days to the election day, it is just indisputable. We are heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah. John King and John, thanks. As we count down to tonight's debate, insiders reveal how both candidates prepare for the big night and who they turn to for help.
As well as is the attendance, or the other academic indicator for the elementary and middle school levels.
New to the report card this year is education spending, but that will also be missing for a little bit longer.
Financial data has not been incorporated into our report card previously. This will be the first year that we will be incorporating that financial data. We hope to have it on the report card by December 31st of 2020.
School districts use that data to provide the public and invested parties with important information.
That state report card really is information for our stakeholders of how we're doing to educate and prepare our students for their next step.
With the data that is missing from COVID-19, there are some challenges that districts will have to overcome. However, they monitor progress all year.
We can't wait till spring to see how our students are doing, because by that time it's too late. So we need those markers along the way to measure progress of our students so we can change and adapt our instruction. And then when we get that final report card, it's kind of that celebration of how we've done.
If all goes as planned, the State Department of Education intends to put out a normal report card next year. In the Peer Newsroom, Austin Goss, Dakota News Now.
Police are searching for a suspect they say stole a pickup truck, led officers on a chase before crashing in western Sioux Falls. According to police, the vehicle was stolen from a gas station. Officers spotted the truck early this morning near 10th and La Mesa and attempted a traffic stop. That's when the vehicle took off. Police pursued the suspect until it got onto Interstate 29. Troopers continued chasing, but the truck exited off the interstate onto Maple, and the pursuit was ended. A short time later, officers received a report of a pickup that crashed near Madison and Redbird. Once on scene, police found the truck empty, but located the passenger a short distance away. She was taken to the hospital with injuries to her legs. Police asked that you call Crime Stoppers with any information. Continuing coverage of the coronavirus pandemic, South Dakota is seeing a significant jump in new and active COVID-19 cases, a state announcing 609 additional cases earlier today. Officials say the active case count surged to just over 4,500. Hospitalizations also increased and currently sits at 273. However, the state says just over 7,300 people were tested, with just over 8% coming back positive.
In Iowa, officials announced just over 900 new cases and 15 deaths. The number of people hospitalized continues to climb and now sits at 444. Despite the increasing numbers, Governor Kim Reynolds said today that hospitals have reported to her they can handle the surge. The state processed just over 5,600 tests. Meanwhile, in Minnesota, 14 new deaths and over 900 cases were announced earlier today. The state processed just over 14,000 tests over the last 24 hours. We'll be right back.
Eric, Vanessa, and Eric, weekday.
Charged with misdemeanor crimes, but that the children, their welfare was really it was up to the Department of Homeland Security to take care of that. Really trying to abdicate any responsibility, any moral authority in that situation. It was a really sort of fascinating and interesting defense, and one that I think people are calling into question. Is it right for Department of Justice officials to say we were just following orders?
And we know, of course, they rolled out that program across the entire border. That was announced by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions in April of 2018. It was so chaotic, so disastrous, the president had to walk it back. And after he did so, Jeff Sessions gave an interview talking about the policy. This was in the summer of 2018. Here's what he had to say back then.
It hasn't been good, and the American people don't like the idea that we're separating families. We never really intended to do that. What we intended to do was to make sure that adults who bring children into the country are charged with the crime they've committed.
Katie, did the draft report that you saw find that Mr. Sessions did not intend to separate families?
The draft report not only found that Mr. Sessions intended to separate families, it found that he knew that his actions, the zero tolerance policy, would necessarily mean the separation of families. Now, the information that supports that allegation was given to him by people at the Department of Justice, including former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He tells the Inspector General that Mr. Sessions was certainly cognizant of this. Now, also keep in mind, Jeff Sessions did not take part in the Inspector General's inquiry. He declined to be interviewed by the Justice Department Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, and he declined to comment for the story that was run by the New York Times yesterday.
So, Katie, when do we expect the final draft of this report?
There are people who expected the report to be out already, but there's been a lot of pushback from the Department of Justice on this report, and so it has been delayed while the Inspector General deals with some of the criticisms coming from the department and department officials.
Katie, when we look back on this time, it is already looked at as one of the darker chapters in modern U.S. history. Thousands of children forcibly separated by the government. It took a court stepping in to stop it, to reunite the kids. There are still children who have not been reunited. The report can't change anything that happened, but what could be the potential impact of this report when it is finalized and released?
Yeah, this report and likely reports that come after it and more reporting that comes after it is going to give the country detailed accounts into the decision, not only the decision making that went into creating this program, but how government officials across the administration all wanted to abdicate more responsibility for the fate of the children. None of them wanted to be blamed for it. And it's going to be a really sort of searing look into what became a policy that resulted in what many people have described as a human rights crisis, as a crime against humanity, some have even said. And I think that when we also look back in the history books on what was significant about the Trump administration, this is going to be one of the most significant chapters.
That is an exclusive and important story from Katie Benner of the New York Times joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
Once weekly Ozempic is helping many people.
Epic disaster. Trumpism is about to not disappear. It'll be around for a while. It's going to take a lot of years to get it back underground, but it's going to suffer its first humiliating defeat. And let this be a message to the class that's up in 2022 about cooperating with the next president of the United States about getting this country back on track. But listen, here's the deal. At the end of the day, they've done a lot of bad things, all of them, as they've been silent, as they've been complicit in Donald Trump's debasement of his office, his desecrations of our national character, his meanness, his cruelty, his assaults on the rule of law at our institutions. But they did one thing in particular. Every one of these people, they knew that Trump was lying about how lethal COVID was. They all knew that he knew how lethal it was. Every one of them knew how lethal it was. Did one of them go to the floor of the Senate and bang on their lectern and say, Mr. President, stop this. stop this insanity. They did not. Did any of them go to the Resolute desk in the Oval Office and bang their hand on it and say, Mr. President, stop this madness? They did not. They did nothing. They did nothing to protect their citizens. And now all of them are looking the camera in the eye, and they're looking their voters in the eye, and they're saying, give me 6 more years. I'll be an independent voice that'll have your back. Well, using the colorful colloquialisms of my native New Jersey, there's a response to that, and it begins with go and it ends with yourself. And I think a lot of voters in a lot of states are saying just that to senators who have so utterly failed in their oath, that have been so faithless to every conceivable concept of competency, goodness, decency, or the principles they originally ran on.
Amazing. What a world. What a world. What a world. Spines are in short order, unfortunately, in the party of Lincoln. But the Lincoln Project is fire. Y'all should follow them on Twitter. Thank you very much, former Senator Claire McCaskill and Steve Schmidt. Stay live on Twitter, man. And still ahead. I know Trump ain't enjoyed it. Y'all have to go and read that thread. It's something else. Still ahead. On a very much more serious note, a shocking new report on one of the darkest chapters of the Trump presidency, the intentional separation of migrant families at the border. The readout continues after this.
Brett, no, this is really getting beyond the pale in terms of the obstruction and stonewalling that Senator Grassley and I and others investigating this have had to endure. And I'm glad that John Durham is getting these documents, but Congress isn't. And, you know, I'm very disappointed, quite honestly, that John Durham has not delivered indictments or provided a report, supposedly because there are reports that he's afraid it might interfere with the election. From my standpoint, I think the greater interference in the election would be withholding important information that the American people should have known years ago. The American people deserve the truth, and they deserve it before they go to the polls.
Here's what the former CIA director, John Brennan, said when asked about this and the release of these documents.
If, in fact, what the Russians were alleging, that Hillary was trying to highlight the reported connections between Trump and the Russians, if, in fact, that was accurate, and that's a big if, there is nothing at all illegal about that. And so John Radcliffe and others are trying to portray this as potentially unlawful activity that deserved follow-up investigation by the FBI. No, it was a campaign activity.
Your response, Senator?
Well, it's stunning. I mean, Trump campaign did nothing wrong, and yet we had an investigation, we had a special counsel, we ended up with an impeachment. We also had the Intelligence Committee assessment that John Brennan quick rushed put together under President Obama. You know, there are rumors that he actually had information that it was really Russia that was interceding on behalf of Clinton. They preferred Clinton to become president, and yet he came up with this Intelligence Committee assessment that said that you know, all 17 intelligence agencies say that Russia intervened on behalf of Trump. No, I believe people like John Brennan have a lot of questions they need to provide answers for, and that's what the American people deserve. They deserve the truth on exactly what happened. The corruption of the transition process, the corruption of the investigation process, the corruption of the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the intelligence community under the Obama administration, and quite honestly, leading into the Trump administration.
Before I let you go, you've been diagnosed with COVID-19. You said you would wear a moon suit if that's what it took to get Amy Coney Barrett's nomination through. Quick thought on that before we let you go, sir.
Absolutely. She's a wonderful person, a wonderful woman, mom, and a great judge. She needs to be confirmed and confirmed expeditiously. The good news is I'm probably one of those lucky 40% that are asymptomatic. Hope to stay that way.
All right, Senator, good luck. Thank you very much. We're back with Karl Rove, Katie Pavlich, Donna Brazil, and new Fox polls after a short break as we get ready for the vice presidential debate here in Salt Lake City.
Joe Biden said he's the Democratic Party, but look who he chose. He's going to serve one term, maybe, and look who he chose to fill in. The most liberal member of the United States.
But isn't the backdrop for this, we have a president who's positive for COVID-19 in the White House, who's walking around the White House and possibly infecting others, and the White House and the president have been covering up when he became positive, when he last tested negative, and he's saying it's a blessing from God and he's cured.
It's a blessing. He said it's a blessing from God because he now knows of a treatment that can help people. That's why it was a blessing, not that he got it.
The fact that he didn't know about
things from getting COVID.
Right. The fact that he didn't know that was a treatment beforehand is pretty pathetic. And it's only when it happens to him that he suddenly wakes up and pays attention.
He saw how effective it was because of the way he felt.
This recalls the whole saga from the beginning, hydrochloroquine, the miracle cure, and all the things that he did to minimize this when he obviously knew
As I said,
it wasn't.
messaging out of this administration on this.
It's not just the messaging, it's the actions. But this
debate is happening on a night where there's a crime scene tape around the White House. I mean, it is a roped off COVID zone.
The other thing, Anderson, that the president's illness does, it does underscore the mortality of the guys at the top of the ticket. And so, you know, we did a focus group in 2008 before the vice presidential debate, and people said they were going to pay a lot of attention because they knew John McCain was 72 years old and had had cancer. And they were, frankly, worried about Barack Obama's safety if he became president. And they honestly were thinking about these people as people who could be president. And I think you're going to see that same seriousness tonight.
Yeah, you're absolutely looking at that.
When the vice presidential nominees take the stage tonight, millions of Americans will already have voted. That's a fact. Coming up, a brand new tally on how many ballots have been cast so far.
It's the season.
Be the oldest president in the history of the United States.
And one of them would have had coronavirus.
And one of them will, hopefully only one of them will have had coronavirus. So, yeah, I mean, it's important who wins. And of course, we should take a moment to acknowledge the trailblazing manner of one of the nominees on the stage tonight, Kamala Harris, the first African-American woman, the first South Asian woman on that stage ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know that tonight Kamala Harris is feeling that weight of history on her shoulders, not just because of what we just talked about, the fact that Americans are going to be looking at this debate to see who the potential next generation of each of their parties could be, but also looking to see whether these two people have what it takes to be in the chair, so to speak. But I think Kamala Harris understands the pressure of being a woman, the pressure of being a black woman in this political environment. I think her team is interested in seeing how Mike Pence deals with that. I am not sure that Mike Pence, he probably has not ever been in a situation where he's had to go toe-to-toe in a political setting against someone like with that kind of biography. And I think we're all just looking to see. I don't know that I have an answer to how Pence is going to handle it.
It's interesting. So the former Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker, who played Tim Kaine, the now vice president's opponent 4 years ago, is involved in his debate prep now and told me that he's convinced that the vice president will acknowledge it, will acknowledge in an overt way the historic nature of her candidacy and how important it is. The question, though, is after that moment, how he moves around and maneuvers around her and whether it will be any different. The other thing is that I'm told from people around the Harris debate prep is that they are cognizant of the fact that she is a woman. And, you know, yes, it's 2020, but women are sometimes perceived differently by voters. Not that they're changing anything. I mean, she is who she is, and she's confident in who she is, and she's done pretty well so far. But that is something that they're thinking about when it comes to perceptions.
And then, of course, there's the whole angle that, and this is Republican talking points, that even if you think Joe Biden is a centrist or a moderate, Kamala Harris is not. That's their pitch, and that Joe Biden is this empty vessel for the AOCs and the Kamala Harrises of the world. And what's interesting, Dave Weigel had an interesting piece about this in the Washington Post, is that when presented with the more progressive aspects of the party, Joe Biden tends to distance himself. Well, that's not me. I'm not a socialist. You know who I am. And Kamala Harris, to be honest, even though she could sell herself as more of a centrist, more of a moderate, she tends to run for it. She tends to embrace the more progressive part of her party.
She has in the primary. And I think this is the pickle that she's going to be in tonight. She took a lot of positions in this Democratic primary in order to stay in the game that put her very far on the left and frankly were kind of different from her political identity prior to that moment. Tonight, Pence is going to try to put her in a box on those issues and going to say, well, you had this position 8 months ago, 10 months ago. How is it different now?
They're definitely ready for the radical left attack, no question about it. I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to put it back on him to say, well, which is it? Am I too far to the left, or if he attacks her on crime, too far to the right?
And as we keep an eye on the debate hall, let's talk about the pandemic safety measures that are in place at the debate hall and whether they're sufficient. Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Jonathan Reiner are both joining us right now. Sanjay, let me start with you. You can see these live pictures of the debate stage now, sign of the times. The seats are 12 feet, 3 inches apart, plexiglass dividers between the two candidates. If, God forbid, Vice President Pence is actually a carrier of coronavirus, and he's tested negative, though that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a carrier, will that plexiglass do anything?
Well, the plexiglass will help with, the basic respiratory droplets, which is a concern in terms of spreading coronavirus. But as you know, Jake, and as you know, the CDC now has on their website, we've been reporting on this for some time, there's also evidence that this virus can spread via aerosols. Think of that more like smoke. So if it's aerosolized, the virus, then the plexiglass isn't really going to do much in terms of preventing that. It can travel around the plexiglass. It can also travel further than 6 feet. So, you look at these types of events, Jake, and I think, we'll look back historically and say, we're in the middle of a pandemic. The viral transmission was growing, and we brought, presidential, vice presidential candidates together for a debate. It's not a good idea. Obviously, I understand the desire to do it. Virtual would be much safer. Doing it outside would be much safer. They're trying to make the best of this situation. So the plexiglass offers a little bit of protection, but doesn't guarantee it by any means.
I agree. This is not going to stand the test of time particularly well when future generations look at this. Dr. Reiner, audience members tonight have to take a coronavirus test, and they have to wear masks. That was the rule last time too, although it was by the honor system, and that of course required people to have a sense of honor. And a lot of members of the Trump team who were guests, including members of the Trump family, either refused to have masks on or took them off as soon as they got there. Is there a risk for people in the audience?
Of course there's a risk, because we're in a pandemic. At our hospital, we haven't had a meeting with more than a handful of people, since March, because we're in a pandemic. And as Dr. Gupta just mentioned, we now know with really greater clarity that this virus is transmitted not just by droplets that can be blocked by plexiglass barriers, but also by aerosols, which can hang in the air and travel on the air conditioning currents. So there's really no reason to have an audience in that room. They should meet electronically. And, there is precedence for this. In 1960, the third debate, Richard Nixon was in California, JFK was in New York, the moderator was in Chicago. This was 60 years ago. It should be done now, not to mention the fact that the vice president is really under quarantine now. He should be home, locked at home for another several days until he fills the 14-day period. There's no reason to have an audience there. There's actually no reason to have anyone there.
And Sanjay, that's kind of a question I have about, this is in the
Jackson's Ravens.
Herself too much from what she's already said. Also expect her, I think, as a prosecutor, to take some of the more outrageous comments that the president has made about COVID and about election security and try to force Mike Pence to say, do you agree with this? Are you going to say that you support that?
Yeah, we actually saw in some of these Senate debates where Senate candidates have been put on the spot on whether or not they defend President Trump's record or are proud of their support of him. Dan Abrams, thanks very much. We'll be right back. The debate's only 10 minutes away.
The reason behind lying is a defining tenet of our university. Our faculty and our staff are achieving national recognition and support at unprecedented levels. Among them, evolutionary geneticist Nels Elde, just yesterday named a MacArthur Fellow. Congratulations, Professor Elde. All of us at the University of Utah are united in purpose. We strive to provide today's students with an exceptional experience that will equip them for a vibrant future as members of the global community. Students are, quite simply, at the center of all we do. Let me introduce you to our student body leader.
Then will be on that stage in about 15 minutes. Senator Harris has a couple of guests with her tonight, a full-time teacher who's also a veteran, and also a state rep who works as a community organizer focusing on helping people affected by coronavirus. She is really going to focus on the virus tonight after President Trump put out that video saying he was cured by Regeneron, an experimental drug not available to most Americans. The DNC slammed Pence, saying that he peddles the president's lies, and the Biden campaign also resumed their negative ads, in part saying that they want to combat those lies. Now, Vice President Pence also has some guests with him. He brought the parents of a humanitarian aid worker who was killed by ISIS. Her parents thanked President Trump for killing al-Baghdadi. He also has the widow of a police captain who died after a violent night of protests, and a black business owner whose shop was burned down even though it was spray painted with the words black owned. He is going to be pressing a law and order message. Now, a Fox News poll that came out just ahead of tonight's debate shows that these two have favorability ratings. Pence is viewed as more negative than positive by a single point. Harris is positive by 13. See how it changes. Brett and Martha.
All right, Jackie, thank you.
So our all-star panel is here tonight. We've got Chris Wallace, Rick Hume, Dana Perino, Juan Williams, Donna Brazil, and Karl Rove. Chris, let's start with you as we get ready to begin this first and only vice presidential debate of 2020.
Well, I have to tell you, Martha, I'm a whole lot more relaxed right now than I was exactly 8 days ago. 5 minutes before the debate. You know, I feel for Susan Page, the very able Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, who's going to be moderating this debate. But it's a tough chore when you know you've got tens of millions of people watching and you have to try to corral two candidates. And I wish Susan a more orderly debate than I got. As far as tonight is concerned, I think that Mike Pence has to score a clean victory. When you look at the week that President Trump had last week with the debate, which according to the polls he lost by a sizable majority to Joe Biden, and then getting the coronavirus and the outbreak in the White House, he's got to stop. Pence has got to stop the political bleeding. You now have multiple polls that show Biden leading Trump by double digits nationally, by double digits in swing states like Pennsylvania and Florida. And so I think Pence has to win tonight. A tie isn't good enough. He has got to reverse the narrative of this race, which is all towards Biden and not very favorable to President Trump.
Dana Perino, your thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering which debater comes tonight when it comes to Kamala Harris. I'm thinking about the primary debates where she had so thoroughly researched and choreographed the attack against Joe Biden when it came to busing that they had T-shirts ready to sell right after the debate. But the other was when Tulsi Gabbard really took her down in terms of her record as a prosecutor, and Kamala Harris looked stunned. She was almost like a deer in the headlights, and that really hastened her exit from the race. I think that both of these candidates are worthy opponents. They are combatants, and I think that it could be a tie tonight, and that the contours of this race will not change too dramatically.
Britt, we understand that Vice President Pence wants to make an aggressive and emotional case for the White House's handling of this coronavirus, and as we all have seen quite clearly this week, they're under a lot of pressure to turn that narrative around.
Well, there is a case to be made. The problem that the ticket has now is that the president hasn't made it very well, and when he's had opportunities to defend his record on this, he harps on the closing of the border to Chinese coming in here early in the game, something that he points out Senator Biden, or Vice President Biden, opposed and criticized. But beyond that, there's a long record of things that the administration did, which I think are lost in have been lost in the arguments that have been made, and the idea that the president and his administration failed on this disease, I think, is pretty well set, and it will take quite a performance by Mike Pence to try to undo that impression. He ought to know. He was the head of the task force. He ought to know everything they did. And what we're going to find out is whether he can make the case, and at least I don't think he's ever going to make that into a winning issue. but he may be able to reduce the negative impression that people have of how the administration has handled this issue. And now that the president himself caught the disease and the White House has got a bunch of other cases, it is front and center as never before.
Moderator Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, addressing the audience behind us before they get started here. Carl, there have been iconic moments in vice presidential debates before, but traditionally they don't move the needle in the big race. Is this one different?
Well, it could be, simply because A, this has been one crazy election year, and B, we have the two oldest men ever to run for president, and whoever takes the oath of office next year will be the oldest man ever to do so. So,
to cheer or to boo or to hiss or to laugh, because that is distracting for the people we are really staging this debate to reach. There will be 2 times when you can applaud. That will be when I announce the 2 candidates on the stage. They'll come on the stage simultaneously. That'll be a time to applaud. And then applaud again at the very end of the debate. But if you could keep, restrain your enthusiasm between those 2 times, I'd appreciate it. And if you could send me a little good karma, that would also be appreciated, but quietly. I'm going now to sit down and get settled and turn my back to you, but not in a rude way. And I'll see you on the other side. Thanks again for being here.
Washington Bureau Chief from USA Today, Susan Page. She's going to be the moderator tonight. We tried last week to take it when Chris Wallace was doing that.
Oh, no, we took it.
I had this big girl up there. I was like, he's going to give the rules. You guys ready? And then he,
yeah. No, we took it. There just wasn't any audio. David Plouffe.
Sorry, David Plouffe. I interrupted you. I felt like I had to make it on that. Please continue.
Finish your thought.
Well, there's 5 million people that have voted. My guess is another 2 weeks, another 10 million will have voted. Election day is 5 days earlier this year. But the other thing I'd say, Rachel, is Donald Trump had the worst 7 days that I can remember in presidential campaign history.
Yeah.
He has no time to lose. So he's now losing to Joe Biden nationally by 10 points. I don't believe he's down 10 in Pennsylvania, but he's down 6 to 7 at a time when ballots are being cast.
Closer to $500,000.
Really has to defend.
Byron Pitts, the Trump campaign was trying to make law and order the big issue.
Let's breathe.
Pointed to my shoulder. we stand on his shoulders, and he's got to defend.
No, if he goes out there and defends Donald Trump like he has for the last 4 years, you can mail this in. Look,
doesn't he have to defend?
Mike Pence is running for president tonight, because the question is not whether these guys are potentially going to be the president. It's when they're going to be the president, right?
When they're going to,
because these are older men who are not well, and so if I were Mike, that's how I'd be thinking. I'm running for president right now, and I've got to be my own guy. And if he's out there just apologizing for Trump, he's number one. It's not going to help himself. He's not going to help Donald Trump.
What do you think he'll do?
That's very tough. He is the running mate.
I understand that.
And he's not at the top of the
He's got to make the case that Donald Trump didn't effectively make on COVID, and he's got to prosecute the case on Kamala Harris being for stacking the court, be for eliminating private health insurance. Those are big issues.
Daylight between him and the president.
Okay, Cecilia Vega, you've covered the White House for the last 4 years. You've covered Kamala Harris when you worked in California.
Yeah, George, I'll be watching to see the role that race and gender play tonight. Unfair or not, Kamala Harris will be held to a different standard given the history that she is about to make on that stage. And on the Pence side, definitely watching to see how he can possibly defend the White House being this hotbed of infection that is right now, given that he is the head of the coronavirus task force.
34 cases now inside the White House, according to FEMA. The debate is less than 1 minute away. Mike Pence, Kamala Harris, moderator Susan Page of USA Today. We'll be right back with the start of the debate.
Few people. This time, 4 years ago, we still had 15 to 70% of the electorate.
debate ever. A reminder, both candidates at the top of the ticket would be the oldest president in history.
President Trump, as you know, who is being treated for coronavirus and potentially still contagious, was in the Oval Office today, just days after being released from the hospital. Pence and Harris have both tested negative, and even before they take the stage, there is a clear divide literally between them. They will be separated by plexiglass and seated 12 feet apart instead of the normal 6. The Commission on Presidential Debate says everyone besides Pence, Harris, and the moderator, that's Susan Page, must wear a mask, and this time they are very serious.
Now, no one expects a repeat of the free-for-all that we witnessed at the presidential debate. It's not in the nature of either candidate. The vice president has done this once before. Senator Harris has not. But the first black and Asian American woman to run for vice president is a former prosecutor, and she delivered pointed attacks on Joe Biden at the Democrats' early debates.
This is going to be quite a
campaign gain ground, both with those key groups of voters and in those battleground states where President Trump right now is underperforming. But look, in Senator Harris and in the vice president, you have two seasoned, skilled debaters, two longtime public servants. This should be a very substantive debate.
All right, Jeff, thanks. Let's turn to NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, Mike Pence may have a tough hill to climb today.
He does. Look, I do think this debate will be more polite, which I think everybody watching will appreciate that. But yes, I think the vice president has a tougher hill to...
This was hurt and destroyed during the protests after George Floyd's death.
And Lisa, what about the Biden-Harris campaign? What are they looking for?
The Biden campaign is trying to manage expectations today, saying Pence can be a very smooth operator when it comes to delivery. But you know, Harris has the more recent debate experience, and what the Biden campaign is hoping is that she will be able to personally connect tonight.
I think a lot of us will be watching to see how this debate differs from the debate we saw last week when it was, in some words, a smackdown between the president and Joe Biden. Moderator Susan Page is on the stage. She's about to introduce the candidates. Let's go to Susan.
Good evening. In Salt Lake City, welcome to the first and only vice presidential debate of 2020, sponsored by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm Susan Page of USA Today. It is my honor to moderate this debate, an important part of our democracy. In Kingsbury Hall tonight, we have a small and socially distant audience, and we've taken extra precautions during this pandemic. Among other things, everyone in the audience is required to wear a face mask, and the candidates will be seated 12 feet apart. To wear a face mask, and the candidates will be seated 12 feet apart. The audience is enthusiastic about their candidates, but they've agreed to express that enthusiasm only twice, at the end of the debate and now when I introduce the candidates. Please welcome California Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence.
Thank you.
Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here. We're meeting as President Trump and the First Lady continue to undergo treatment in Washington after testing positive for COVID-19. We send our thoughts and prayers to them for their rapid and complete recovery and for the recovery of everyone afflicted by the coronavirus. The two campaigns and the Commission on Presidential Debates have agreed to the ground rules for tonight. I'm here to enforce them on behalf of the millions of Americans who are watching. One note, no one in either campaign or at the Commission or anywhere else has been told in advance what topics I'll raise or what questions I'll ask. This 90-minute debate will be divided into 9 segments of about 10 minutes each. I'll begin a segment by posing a question to each of you, sometimes the same question, sometimes a different question on the same topic. You will then have 2 minutes to answer without interruption by me or the other candidate. Then we'll take 6 minutes or so to discuss the issue. At that point, although there will always be more to say, we'll move on to the next topic. We want a debate that is lively, But Americans also deserve a discussion that is civil. These are tumultuous times, but we can and will have a respectful exchange about the big issues facing our nation. Let's begin with the ongoing pandemic that has cost our country so much. Senator Harris, the coronavirus is not under control. Over the past week, Johns Hopkins reports that 39 states have had more COVID cases over the past 7 days than in the week before. 9 states have set new. What would a Biden administration do in January and February that a Trump administration wouldn't do? Would you impose new lockdowns for businesses and schools and hotspots? A federal mandate to wear masks? You have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Thank you, Susan. Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the Vice President and the President were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They were informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it would be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew what was happening and they didn't tell you. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Well, Joe Biden does. And our plan is about what we need to do around a national strategy for contact tracing, for testing, for administration of the vaccine, and making sure that it will be free for all. That is the plan that Joe Biden has and that I have, knowing that we have to get a hold of what has been going on, and we need to save our country. And Joe Biden is the best leader to do that, and frankly, this administration has forfeited their right to re-election based on this.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, more than 210,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 since February. The U.S. death toll as a percentage
election based on this.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, more than 210,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 since February. The U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population is higher than that of almost every other wealthy nation on earth. For instance, our death rate is 2.5 times that of Canada next door. You head the administration's coronavirus task force. Why is the U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population higher than that of almost every other wealthy country? And you have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Susan, thank you. And I want to thank the Commission and the University of Utah for hosting this event. And Senator Harris, it's a privilege to be on the stage with you. And our nation's gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China, President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done. And that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because with that time, we were able to reinvent testing. More than 115 million tests have been done to date. We were able to see to the delivery of billions of supplies so our doctors and nurses had the resources support they needed. And we began, really, before the month of February was out, to develop a vaccine and to develop medicines and therapeutics that have been saving lives all along the way. And under President Trump's leadership, Operation Warp Speed, we believe, will have literally tens of millions of doses of a vaccine before the end of this year. The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. And I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart, can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. It's saved countless American lives.
Senator Harris, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss. And you know, the vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't y'all tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm.
Well, let's get
no, but Susan, this is important.
Susan,
I want to add, but if, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
I'm
speaking.
You have 15 more seconds, and then we'll give the vice president a chance to
So I want to ask the American people, how calm were you when you were panicked about where you're going to get your next roll of toilet paper? How calm were you when your kids were sent home from school and you didn't know when they could go back? How calm were you when your children couldn't see your parents because you were afraid they could kill them?
Let's give Vice President Pence a chance to respond. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, there's not a day gone by that I haven't thought of every American family that's lost a loved one. And I want all of you to know that you'll always be in our hearts and in our prayers. But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made. The reality, if I may finish, Senator, the reality is Dr. Fauci said everything that he told the president in the Oval Office, the president told the American people. Now, President Trump, I will tell you, has boundless confidence in the American people, and he always spoke with confidence that we'd get through this together. But when you say it hasn't worked, when Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and our medical experts came to us in the second week of March, they said if the president didn't take the unprecedented step of shutting down roughly half of the American economy, that we could lose 2.2 million Americans. Now, that's the reality.
Thank you.
They also said to us if we did everything right, Susan, we could still lose more than 200,000 Americans.
Vice President,
now, one life lost is too many, Susan. But the American people, I believe, deserve credit for the sacrifices that they have made, putting the health of their family and their neighbors first, our doctors, our nurses, our first responders.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And I'm going to speak up on behalf of what the American people have done.
Vice President Pence, you were in the front row in a Rose Garden event 11 days ago at what seems to have been a super spreader event for senior administration and congressional officials. No social distancing, few masks, and now a cluster of coronavirus cases among those who were there. How can you expect Americans to follow the administration's safety guidelines to protect themselves from COVID when you at the White House have not been doing so?
Well, the American people have demonstrated over the last 8 months that when given the facts, they're willing to put the health of their families and their neighbors and people they don't even know first. And President Trump and I have great confidence in the American people and their ability to take that information and put it into practice. In the height of the epidemic, when we were losing a heartbreaking number of 2,500 Americans a day, we surged resources to New Jersey and New York and New Orleans and Detroit. We told the American people what needed to be done, and the American people made the sacrifices. When the outbreak in the Sun Belt happened this summer, again, Americans stepped forward. But the reality is the work of the President of the United States goes on. A vacancy on the Supreme Court of the United States has come upon us, and the President introduced Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Thank you, Vice President.
If I may say, that Rose Garden event, There's been a great deal of speculation about it. My wife Karen and I were there and honored to be there. Many of the people who were at that event, Susan, actually were tested for coronavirus, and it was an outdoor event, which all of our scientists regularly and routinely advise. The difference here is President Trump and I trust the American people to make choices in the best interest of their health. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris consistently talk about mandates, and not just mandates with the coronavirus, but a government takeover of health care, the Green New Deal, all government control. We're about freedom and respecting the freedom of the American people.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage to be a leader speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves. But this administration stood on information that if you had as a parent, if you had as a worker knowing you didn't have enough money saved up, and now you're standing in a food line because of the ineptitude of an administration that was unwilling to speak the truth to the American people. So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration. It is asking too much of the people.
Susan, we talk about
it is asking too much of the people. That they would not be equipped with the information they need to help themselves to protect their parents and their children.
Sorry. Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, I'm sorry.
It's fine, I'm Kamala.
No, you're Senator Harris to me. For life to get back to normal, Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released now. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors, that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice President Pence, there have been a lot of repercussions from this pandemic. In recent days, the president's diagnosis of COVID-19 has underscored the importance of the job that you hold and that you are seeking. That's our second topic tonight. It's the role of the vice president. One of you will make history on January 20th. You will be the vice president to the oldest president the United States has ever had. Donald Trump will be 74 years old on Inauguration Day. Joe Biden will be 78 years old. That already has raised concerns among some voters, concerns that have been sharpened by President Trump's hospitalization in recent days. Vice President Pence, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with President Trump about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes without interruption.
Well, Susan, thank you, although I would like to go back.
I think we need to move on to the issue.
Well, thank you, but I would like to go back because the reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. We have 5 companies in phase 3 clinical trials, and we're right now producing tens of millions of doses. So the fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is that we will have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year. And it will have the capacity to save countless American lives. And your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine is it's just unacceptable. And let me also say, you know, the reality is when you talk about failure in this administration, we actually do know what failure looks like in a pandemic. It was 2009. The swine flu arrived in the United States. Thankfully, it ended up not being as lethal as the coronavirus. But before the end of the year, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, not 7.5 million people contracted the swine flu. 60 million Americans contracted the swine flu. If the swine flu had been as lethal as the coronavirus, in 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, we would have lost 2 million American lives. His own chief of staff, Ron Klain, would say last year that it was pure luck that they did, quote, everything possible wrong. and
Thank you,
still
Vice
learn
President.
from it. And I think the
Vice President
American
Pence,
people, I'm going to say again, can be
Vice
proud
President Pence, I'm sorry.
of what we have done. And Senator, please
Thank you, Vice
stop
President
undermining
Pence.
confidence in a vaccine.
Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked Vice President Pence, which is, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with Vice President Biden about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, and if you win the election next month, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
So let me tell you, first of all, the day I got the call from Joe Biden, it was actually a Zoom call, asking me to serve with him on this ticket was probably one of the most memorable days of my life. I thought about my mother, who came to the United States at the age of 19, gave birth to me at the age of 25 at Kaiser Hospital in Oakland, California. And the thought that I'd be sitting here right now, I know would make her proud. She must be looking down on this. Joe and I were raised in a very similar way. We were raised with values that are about hard work, about the value and the dignity of public service, and about the importance of fighting for the dignity of all people. And I think Joe asked me to serve with him because, I have a career that included being elected the first woman district attorney in San Francisco, where I created models of innovation for law enforcement in terms of reform of the criminal justice system. I was elected the first woman of color and black woman to be elected Attorney General of the state of California, where I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. And there I took on everything from transnational criminal organizations to the big banks that were taking advantage of homeowners to for-profit colleges that were taking advantage of veterans. And then, of course, now I serve in the United States Senate as only the second black woman ever elected to the United States Senate. I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, where I've been in regular receipt of classified information about threats to our nation and hotspots around the world. I've traveled the world. I've met with our soldiers in war zones. And I think Joe has asked me to serve with him because he knows that we share a purpose which is about lifting up the American people. And after the 4 years that we have seen of Donald Trump unifying our country around our common values and principles.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Neither President Trump nor Vice President Biden has released a sort of detailed health information that had become the modern norm until the 2016 election. And in recent days, President Trump's doctors have given misleading answers or refused to answer basic questions about his health. And my question to each of you in turn is this information voters deserve to know? Vice President Pence, would you like to go first?
Well, Susan, thank you. And let me say, on behalf of the President and the First Lady, how moved we've all been by the outpouring of prayers and concern for the President. And I do believe it's emblematic of the prayers and the concern that have ushered forth for every American impacted by the coronavirus. But the care the President received at Walter Reed Hospital, the White House doctors, was exceptional. They practiced all along the way will continue. The American people have a right to know about the health and well-being of their President, and will continue to do that. But I'm just extremely grateful and was more than a little moved by the broad and bipartisan support. And Senator, I want to thank you and Joe Biden for your expressions of genuine concern. And I also want to congratulate you, as I did on that phone call, on the historic nature of your nomination. I never expected to be on this stage 4 years ago, so I know the feeling. But the reality is we've got an election before the American people in the midst of this challenging year. And the stakes have never been higher. I think the choice has never been clearer.
I want to give Senator Harris a chance to respond to the same question I asked, which is, do voters have a right to know more detailed health information about presidential candidates, and especially about presidents, especially when they're facing some kind of challenge?
Absolutely, and that's why Joe Biden has been so incredibly transparent, and certainly by contrast, the president has not, both in terms of health records, but also let's look at taxes. We now know, because of great investigative journalism, that Donald Trump paid $750 in taxes when I first heard about it, I literally said, you mean $750,000? And it was like, no, $750. We now know Donald Trump owes and is in debt for $400 million. And just so everyone is clear, when we say in debt, it means you owe money to somebody. And it'd be really good to know who the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, owes money to, because the American people have a right to know what is influencing the President's decisions. And is he making those decisions on the best interest of the American people, of you, or self-interest? So, Susan, I'm glad you asked about transparency, because it has to be across the board. Joe has been incredibly transparent over many, many years. The one thing we all know about Joe, he puts it all out there. He is honest, he is forthright. But Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been about covering up everything.
Thank you, Senator Harris. I want to give you a chance to respond, Vice President.
Well, look, I respect the fact that Joe Biden spent 47 years in public life. I respect your public service as well.
Thank you.
The American people have a president who's a businessman, who's a job creator, who's paid tens of millions of dollars in taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes. He's created tens of thousands of American jobs. And the president said those public reports are not accurate. And the president's also released literally stacks of financial disclosures the American people can review just as the law allows. But the distinction here is that Joe Biden, 47 years in public service, compared to President Donald Trump, who brought all of that experience 4 years ago.
Thank you, Vice President.
Turned this economy around by cutting taxes, fighting for free and fair trade, and all of that's
Thank you, Vice President.
If Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
You know, that's a good segue into our third topic, which is about the economy. This has been another aspect of life for Americans that's been so affected by this coronavirus. We have a jobs crisis brewing. On Friday, we learned that the unemployment rate had declined to 7.9% in September, but the job growth had stalled, and that was before the latest round of layoffs and furloughs in the airline industry at Disney and elsewhere. Hundreds of thousands of discouraged workers have stopped looking for work. Nearly 11 million jobs that existed at the beginning of the year haven't been replaced. Those hardest hit include Latinos, blacks, and women. Senator Harris, the Biden-Harris campaign has proposed new programs to boost the economy, and you would pay for that new spending by raising $4 trillion in taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations. Some economists warn that could curb entrepreneurial ventures that fuel growth and create jobs. Would raising taxes put the recovery at risk? And you have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
Thank you. On the issue of the economy, I think there couldn't be a more fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing, which is why he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, leading to a $2 trillion deficit that the American people are going to have to pay for. On day one, Joe Biden will repeal that tax bill. He'll get rid of it. And what he'll do with the money is invest it in the American people. And through a plan that is about investing in infrastructure, something that Donald Trump said he would do. I remember hearing about some infrastructure week. I don't think it ever happened. But Joe Biden will do that. He'll invest in infrastructure. It's about upgrading our roads and bridges, but also investing in clean energy and renewable energy. Joe is going to invest that money in what we need to do around innovation. There was a time when our country believed in science and invested in research and development so that we were an innovation leader on the globe. Joe Biden will use that money to invest in education. So, for example, for folks who want to go to a 2-year community college, it will be free. If you come from a family that makes less than $125,000, you'll go to a public university for free. And across the board, we'll make sure that if you have student loan debt, it's cut by $10,000. That's how Joe Biden thinks about the economy, which is it's about investing in the people of our country as opposed to passing a tax bill, which had the benefit of letting American corporations go offshore to do their business.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, your administration has been predicting a rapid and robust recovery, but the latest economic report suggests that's not happening. Should Americans be braced for an economic comeback that is going to take not months, but a year or more? You have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
When President Trump and I took office, America had gone through the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression. So when Joe Biden was vice president, they tried to tax and spend and regulate and bail our way back to a growing economy. President Trump cut taxes across the board. Despite what Senator Harris says, the average American family of four had $2,000 in savings in taxes. And with the rise in wages that occurred, most predominantly for blue-collar, hard-working Americans, the average household income for a family of four increased by $4,000 following President Trump's tax cuts. But America, you just heard Senator Harris tell you, on day one, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. It's really remarkable to think. I mean, right after a time where we're going through a pandemic that lost 22 million jobs at the height, we've already added back 11.6 million jobs because we had a president who cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, fought for free and fair trade, and secured $4 trillion from the Congress of the United States to give direct payments to families, save 50 million jobs through the Paycheck Protection Program. We literally have spared no expense to help the American people and the American worker through this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to raise taxes. They want to bury our economy under a $2 trillion Green New Deal, which you were one of the original co-sponsors of in the United States Senate. They want to abolish fossil fuels and ban fracking, which would cost hundreds of thousands of American jobs all across the heartland. And Joe Biden wants to go back to the economic surrender to China, that when we took office, half of our international trade deficit was with China alone. And Joe Biden wants to repeal all of the tariffs that President Trump put into effect to fight for American jobs and American workers. Joe Biden says democracy's on the ballot. Make no mistake about it, Susan. The American economy, the American comeback is on the ballot with 4 more years of growth and opportunity, 4 more years of President Donald Trump. American comeback is on the ballot with 4 more years of growth and opportunity, 4 more years of President Donald Trump. 2021 is going to be the biggest economic year in the history of this country.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. Senator Harris.
Well, I mean, we saw enough of it in last week's debate, but I think this is supposed to be a debate based on fact and truth. And the truth and the fact is Joe Biden has been very clear. He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait.
I'm speaking.
It'd be important if you said the truth. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. That was tax cuts that gave the average working family $2,000 in a tax break every single year. Senator,
that is absolutely not true.
Is he only going to repeal part of the Trump tax cuts?
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay. Joe Biden will not raise taxes on anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden will not end fracking. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden is the one who, during the Great Recession, was responsible for the Recovery Act that brought America back. And now the Trump-Pence administration wants to take credit when they rode the coattails of Joe Biden's success for the economy that they had at the beginning of their term. Of course, now the economy is a complete disaster. But Joe Biden, on the one hand, did that. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who has reigned over a recession that is being compared to the Great Depression. On the one hand, you have Joe Biden, who was responsible with President Barack Obama for the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to over 20 million Americans and protected people with pre-existing conditions. And what it also did is it saved those families who otherwise were going bankrupt because of hospital bills they could not afford. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who's in court right now, trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which means that you will lose protections if you have pre-existing conditions. And this is very important, Susan.
Yes.
And it's important.
We need to give Vice President.
I'd just like to, he interrupted me, and I'd like to just finish, please. If you have a pre-existing condition heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, they're coming for you. If you love someone who has a pre-existing condition, they're coming for you. If you are under the age of 26 on your parents' coverage, they're coming for you.
Senator Harris, thank you. Let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, I hope we have a chance to talk about health care, because Obamacare was a disaster. The American people remember it well. And President Trump and I have a plan to improve health care and to protect pre-existing conditions for every American. But look, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You yourself said on multiple occasions when you were running for president that you would ban fracking. Joe Biden looked a supporter in the eye and pointed and said, I guarantee that we will abolish fossil fuels. We have a $2 trillion version of the Green New Deal, Susan, that your newspaper, USA Today, said really wasn't that very different from the original Green New Deal. More taxes, more regulation, banning fracking, abolishing fossil fuel, crushing American energy, and economic surrender to China is a prescription for economic decline. President Trump and I will keep America growing. The V-shaped recovery that's underway right now will continue with 4 more years of President Donald Trump.
Thank you very, very much, Vice President Pence. Once again, you've provided the perfect segue to a new topic, which is climate change. And Vice President Pence, I'd like to pose the first question to you. This year, we've seen record-setting hurricanes in the South. Another one, Hurricane Delta, is now threatening the Gulf. And we have seen record-setting wildfires in the West. Do you believe, as concluded, that man-made climate change has made wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and have made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. Well, first, I'm very proud of our record on the environment and on conservation. According to all of the best estimates, our air and land are cleaner than any time ever recorded. Our water is among the cleanest in the world. And just a little while ago, the President signed the Outdoors Act. It's the largest investment in our public lands and public parks in 100 years. So President Trump has made a commitment to conservation and to the environment. Now, with regard to climate change, the climate is changing. But the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would put us back in the Paris Climate Accord. They'd impose the Green New Deal, which would crush American energy, would increase the energy costs of American families in their homes, and literally would crush American jobs. And President Trump and I believe that the progress that we have made in a cleaner environment has been happening precisely because we have a strong free market economy. You know, what's remarkable is the United States has reduced CO2 more than the countries that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, but we've done it through innovation. And we've done it through natural gas and fracking, which, Senator, the American people can go look at the record. I know Joe Biden says otherwise now, as you do, but the both of you repeatedly committed to abolishing fossil fuel and banning fracking. And so by creating the kind of American innovation, we're actually steering toward a stronger and better environment. With regard to wildfires, President Trump and I believe that forest management has to be front and center, and even Governor Gavin Newsom from your state has agreed we've got to work on forest management. And with regard to hurricanes, the National Oceanic Administration tells us that actually as difficult as they are,
Thank you, Vice President.
There are no more hurricanes today than there were 100 years ago.
Thank you.
But many of the climate alarmists use hurricanes and wildfires to try and sell the bill of goods of a Green New Deal. And President Trump and I are going to always put American jobs and American workers first.
Senator Harris, as the Vice President mentioned, you co-sponsored the Green New Deal in Congress. But Vice President Biden said in last week's debate that he does not support the Green New Deal. But if you look at the Biden-Harris campaign website, it describes the Green New Deal as a crucial framework. What exactly would be the stance of a Biden-Harris administration toward the Green New Deal? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact. I will repeat that Joe Biden has been very clear that he thinks about growing jobs, which is why he will not increase taxes for anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. Joe Biden's economic plan, Moody's, which is a reputable Wall Street firm, has said will create 7 million more jobs than Trump's. And part of those jobs that will be created by Joe Biden are going to be about clean energy and renewable energy. Home state of California. Joe sees what is happening on the Gulf states, which are being battered by storms. Joe has seen and talked with the farmers in Iowa, whose entire crops have been destroyed because of floods. And so Joe believes, again, in science. I'll tell you something, Susan. I served, when I first got to the Senate, on the committee that's responsible for the environment. Do you know this administration took the word science off the website and then took the phrase climate change off the website? We have seen a pattern with this administration, which is they don't believe in science. And Joe's plan is about saying we're going to deal with it, but we're also going to create jobs. Donald Trump, when asked about the wildfires in California, and the question was, you know, the science is telling us this, you know what Donald Trump said? Science doesn't know. So let's talk about who is prepared to lead our country over the course of the next 4 years on what is an existential threat to us as human beings. Joe is about saying we're going to invest that in renewable energy. It's going to be about the creation of millions of jobs. We will achieve net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Joe has a plan. This has been a lot of talk from the Trump administration, and really it has been to go backward instead of forward. We will also re-enter the climate agreement with pride.
Senator Harris just said that climate change is an existential threat. Vice President Pence, do you believe that climate change poses an existential threat?
As I said, Susan, the climate is changing. We'll follow the science. But once again, Senator Harris is denying the fact that they're going to raise taxes on every American. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that on day one he was going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. Those tax cuts delivered $2,000 in tax relief to the average family of four across America. And with regard to banning fracking, I just recommend that people look at the record. You yourself said repeatedly that you would ban fracking. You were the first Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And while Joe Biden denied the Green New Deal, Susan, thank you for pointing out, the Green New Deal is on their campaign website. And as USA Today said, it's essentially the same plan as you co-sponsored with AOC when she submitted it in the Senate. And you just heard the senator say that she's going to resubmit America to the Paris Climate Accord. Look, the American people have always cherished our environment. We'll continue to cherish it. We've made great progress reducing CO2 emissions through American innovation and the development of natural gas through fracking. We don't need a massive $2 trillion Green New Deal that would impose all new mandates on American businesses and American families.
Thank you.
Joe Biden wants us to retrofit 4 million American business buildings. It makes no sense. It will cost jobs. President Trump is going to put America first. He's going to put jobs first, and we're going to take care of our environment and follow the science.
But, you know, on the issue of jobs,
Senator Harris,
let's talk about that. The Vice President earlier referred to, as part of what he thinks is an accomplishment, the President's trade war with China. He lost that trade war. He lost it. What ended up happening is because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy because of it. We are in a manufacturing recession because of it. And when we look at where this administration has been, there are estimates that by the end of the term of this administration, they will have lost more jobs than almost any other presidential administration. And the American people know what I'm talking about. You know, I think about 20-year-olds. You know, we have a 20-year-old, a 20-something-year-old, who are coming out of high school and college right now, and you're wondering, is there going to be a job there for me? We're looking at people who are trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent by the end of the month. Almost half of American renters are worried about whether they're going to be able to pay rent by the end of the month. This is where the economy is in America right now, and it is because of the catastrophe and the failure of leadership of this administration.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you just 15 seconds to respond, because then I want to move on.
Well, I'd love to respond. Look, lost the trade war with China. Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades. And again, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. When Joe Biden was vice president, we lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, and President Obama said they were never coming back. He said we needed a magic wand to bring them back. In our first 3 years after we cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, this administration saw 500,000 manufacturing jobs created. And that's exactly the kind of growth we're going to continue to see as we bring our nation through this pandemic. The Green New Deal, your massive new mandates, your Paris Climate Accord, it's going to kill jobs this time, just like it killed jobs.
I just need to respond very quickly.
15 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. Joe Biden is responsible for saving America's auto industry, and you voted against it. So let's set the record straight. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about China. We have, as our next topic, we have no more complicated or consequential foreign relationship than the one with China. It is a huge market for American agricultural goods. It's a potential partner in dealing with climate change in North Korea. And in a video tonight, President Trump again blamed it for the coronavirus, saying China will pay. Vice President Pence, how would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Competitors, adversaries, enemies? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Susan. Well, before I leave that, let me speak to voting records if I can. You know, everybody knows that NAFTA cost literally thousands of American factories to close. We saw automotive jobs go south of the border. President Trump fought to renegotiate NAFTA. And the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is now the law of the land. American people deserve to know Senator Kamala Harris was one of only 10 members of the Senate to vote against the USMCA. It was a huge win for American auto workers. It was a huge win for American farmers, especially dairy in the upper Midwest. But Senator, you said it didn't go far enough on climate change, that you put your radical environmental agenda ahead of American auto workers and ahead of American jobs. And the American people deserve to know that. It's probably why Newsweek magazine said that Kamala Harris was the most liberal member of the United States Senate in 2019. More liberal than Bernie Sanders, more liberal than any of the others in the United States Senate. So now with regard to China, look, Susan, first and foremost, China is to blame for the coronavirus. And President Trump is not happy about it. He's made that very clear, made it clear again today. China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel into China to get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February. And China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel into China to get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February. Fortunately, President Trump, in dealing with China from the outset of this administration, standing up to China that had been taking advantage of America for decades in the wake of Joe Biden's cheerleading for China, President Trump made that decision before the end of January to suspend all travel from China. And again, the American people deserve to know Joe Biden opposed President Trump's decision to suspend all travel from China. He said it was hysterical. He said it was xenophobic.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
But President Trump has stood up to China. We're going to continue to stand strong.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
We want to improve the relationship, but we're going to level the playing field, and we're going to hold China accountable for what they did to America with the coronavirus.
Thank you. Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked the Vice President. How would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Are we competitors, adversaries, enemies? You'll have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Susan, the Trump administration's perspective and approach to China has resulted in the loss of American lives, American jobs, and America's standing. There's a weird obsession that President Trump has had with getting rid of whatever accomplishment was achieved by President Obama and Vice President Biden. For example, they created within the White House an office that basically was responsible for monitoring pandemics. They got away, they got rid of it.
Not true.
There was a team of disease experts that President Obama and Vice President Biden dispatched to China to monitor what is now predictable and what might happen. They pulled them out. We now are looking at 210,000 Americans who have lost their lives. Let's look at the job situation. We mentioned before the trade deal, the trade war, they wanted to call it, with China. It resulted in the loss of over 300 manufacturing jobs and a manufacturing recession, and the American consumer paying thousands of dollars more for goods because of that failed war that they called it. Then let's talk about standing. Pew, a reputable research firm, has done an analysis that shows that leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, than they do Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is where we are today because of a failure of leadership by this administration.
United States in terms of global leadership over the past 4 years. And of course, times do change. What's your definition? We've seen strains with China, of course, as the Vice President mentioned. We've seen strains with our traditional allies in NATO and elsewhere. What is your definition of the role of American leadership in 2020?
So, you know, Joe is, I love talking with Joe about a lot of these issues. And, you know, Joe, I think he said it quite well. He says, you know, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships. And so we know this in our personal and professional relationships. You got to keep your word to your friends. You got to be loyal to your friends. People who've stood with you, got to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check. But what we have seen with Donald Trump is that he has betrayed our friends and embraced dictators around the world. Let's take, for example, Russia. So, Russia, I serve on the Intelligence Committee of the United States Senate. America's intelligence community told us Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States in 2016 and is playing in 2020. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said the same. But Donald Trump, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, prefers to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of the American intelligence community. You look at our friends at NATO. He's walked away from agreements. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country. And because of Donald Trump's unilateral approach to foreign policy, coupled with his isolationism, he pulled us out and has made America less safe. So, Susan, it's about relationships. And the thing that has always been part of the strength of our nation, in addition to our great military, has been that we keep our word. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that because he doesn't understand what it means to be honest.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, thank you. Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that and never did. We stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our alliances across the Asia-Pacific, and we've stood strong against those who would do us harm. You know, when President Trump came into office, ISIS had captured an area of the Middle East the size of Pennsylvania. But President Trump unleashed the American military, and our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader al-Baghdadi without one American casualty. America's hearts today are with the family of KELO, the parents of which are here with us tonight in Salt Lake City. Today, 2 of the ISIS killers responsible for KELO murder were brought to justice in the United States. Jihadi John was killed on the battlefield along with the other beetle. The reality is that when Joe Biden was vice president, we had an opportunity to save KELO. It breaks my heart to reflect on it, but the military came into the Oval Office, presented a plan. They said they knew where KELO was. Baghdadi had held her for 18 months, abused her mercilessly before they killed her. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they hesitated for a month. And when armed forces finally went in, it was clear she'd been moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe KELO would be alive today.
Thank you, Vice President.
We destroyed the ISIS caliphate. And you talk about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the last administration transferred $1.8 billion to the leading state sponsor of terrorism. President Donald Trump got us out of the deal.
Thank you, Vice President.
And when Qasem Soleimani was traveling to Baghdad to do harm to Americans, President Donald Trump took
Thank you, Vice
out.
President Pence.
And America is safer, our allies are safer. The American people know President Donald Trump will never have
Thank you, Vice President.
take action.
I would like to give Senator Harris a chance to respond, but not at such great length, because of course there are other topics we want to talk about.
But I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened to her is awful, and it should have never happened. And I know Joe feels the same way. And I know that President Obama feels the same way. But you mentioned Soleimani. Let's start there. So after the strike on Soleimani, there was a counter strike on our troops in Iraq. And they suffered serious brain injuries. And do you know what Donald Trump dismissed them as? Headaches. And this is about a pattern of Donald Trump's, where he has referred to our men who are serving in our military as suckers and losers. Donald Trump, who went to Arlington Cemetery and stood above the graves of our fallen heroes and said, what's in it for them? Because of course, you know, he only thinks about what's in it for him. Let's take what he said about John McCain, a great American hero. And Donald Trump says he doesn't deserve to be called a hero because he was a prisoner of war. And this is very important when you want to talk about who is the current commander-in-chief and what they care about and what they don't care about. Public reporting that Russia had bounties on the heads of American soldiers. And you know what a bounty is? If somebody puts a price on your head and they will pay it if you are killed. And Donald Trump had talked at least 6 times to Vladimir Putin and never brought up the subject. Joe Biden would never do that. Joe Biden would hold Russia to account for any threat to our nation's security or to our troops who are sacrificing their lives for the sake of our democracy and our safety.
Thank you, Senator Harris. This is such an important as well, and I want to make sure we have a chance
I really
to
have
talk
to
about.
respond to that. Look, she has
15 seconds because
I got to have
trying
more
to
than
keep.
that. Look,
well, I'm sorry, Vice President, but you've had more time than she's had so far.
Slanders against President Donald Trump regarding men and women of our armed forces are absurd.
I'm sorry, Vice President Pence.
My son is a captain in the United States Marine Corps. My son-in-law is deployed in the United States Navy. I can assure all of you, with sons and daughters serving in our military, President Donald Trump not only respects but reveres all of those who serve in our armed forces, and any suggestion otherwise is ridiculous.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
The American people deserve, Susan, the American people deserve to know.
Vice President Pence, I did not,
Susan,
I did not create the rules for tonight.
Joe Biden.
Your campaigns agreed to the rules for tonight's debate with the Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm here to enforce them, which involve moving from one topic to another, giving roughly equal time to both of you, which is what I'm trying very hard to do.
Go right ahead.
So I want to go ahead and move to the next topic, which is an important one, as the last topic was, and that is the Supreme Court. On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to open hearings on Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. Senator Harris, you'll be there as a member of the committee. Her confirmation would cement the court's conservative majority and make it likely open to more abortion restrictions, even to overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Access to abortion would then be up to the states. Vice President Pence, you're the former governor of Indiana. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want Indiana to do? Would you want your home state to ban all abortions? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, thank you for the question, but I'll use a little bit of my time to respond to that very important issue before. The American people deserve to know Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was responsible for the death of hundreds of American service members. When the opportunity came, we saw him headed to Baghdad to kill more Americans. President Trump didn't hesitate, and Qasem Soleimani is gone. But you deserve to know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris actually criticized the decision to take out Qasem Soleimani. It's really inexplicable, but with regard to Joe Biden, it's explainable. Because history records that Joe Biden actually opposed the raid against Osama bin Laden. It's absolutely essential that we have a commander-in-chief who will not hesitate to act to protect American lives and to protect American service members, and that's what you have in President Donald Trump. Now, with regard to the Supreme Court of the United States, about the opportunity to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett become Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she's a brilliant woman, and she will bring a lifetime of experience and a sizable American family to the Supreme Court of the United States. And our hope is, in the hearing next week, unlike Justice Kavanaugh received with treatment from you and others, but we hope she gets a fair hearing. And we particularly hope that we don't see the kind of attacks on her Christian faith that we saw before. I mean, the Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee before, when Judge Barrett was being confirmed for the Court of Appeals, expressed concern that the dogma of her faith lived loudly in her. Dick Durbin of Illinois said that it was a concern. Senator, I know one of our judicial nominees you actually attacked because they were a member of the Catholic Knights of Columbus, just because the Knights of Columbus holds pro-life views. And
thank you, Vice President.
So
your time
my hope is that when the hearing takes place, that
thank you, Vice President Pence.
That Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be respected,
thank you, Vice President Pence.
Voted and confirmed with the Supreme Court of the United States.
Senator Harris, you're the senator from and former Attorney General of California. So let me ask you a parallel question to the one I posed to the Vice President. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want California to do? Would you want your home state to enact no restrictions on access to abortion? And you have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, Joe Biden and I are both people of faith, and it's insulting to suggest that we would knock anyone for their faith. And in fact, Joe, if elected, will be only the second practicing Catholic as President of the United States. On the issue of this nomination, Joe and I are very clear, as are the majority of the American people. We are 27 days before the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And, you know, before, when this conversation has come up, you know, it's been about election year or election time. We're literally in an election. Over 4 million people have voted. People are in the process of voting right now. And so Joe has been very clear, as the American people are. Let the American people fill that seat in the White House, and then we'll fill that seat on the United States Supreme Court. And to your point, Susan, the issues before us couldn't be more serious. There's the issue of choice, and I will always fight for a woman's right to make a decision about her own body. It should be her decision and not that of Donald Trump and the Vice President, Michael Pence. But let's also look at what else is before the court. It's the Affordable Care Act. Like, literally in the midst of a public health pandemic, when over 210,000 people have died, and 7 million people probably have what will be in the future considered a pre-existing condition because you contracted the virus. Donald Trump is in court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And I said it before, and it bears repeating. This means that there will be no more protections if they win for people with pre-existing conditions. That there will be no more protections if they win for people with pre-existing conditions. This means that over 20 million people will lose your coverage. It means that if you're under the age of 26, you can't stay on your parents' coverage anymore. And here's the thing. The contrast couldn't be more clear. They're trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Joe Biden is saying, let's expand coverage. Let's give you a choice of a public option or private coverage. Let's bring down premiums.
Thank you, Senator
Let's
Harris.
lower Medicare eligibility to 60.
Thank you, Senator.
That's true leadership.
You know, you mentioned earlier, Vice President Pence, that the president was committed to maintaining protections for people with pre-existing conditions. But you do have this court case that you are supporting, your administration supporting, that would strike down the Affordable Care Act. The president says, President Trump says that he's going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but he has not explained how he would do that. And that was one of the toughest nuts to crack when they were passing the Affordable Care Act. So tell us specifically, how would your administration protect Americans with pre-existing conditions to have access to affordable insurance if the Affordable Care Act is struck down?
Well, thank you, Susan. But let me just say, addressing your very first question, I couldn't be more proud to serve as vice president to a president who stands without apology for the sanctity of human life. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. And this is another one of those cases where there's such a dramatic contrast. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris support taxpayer funding of abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. Late-term abortion. They want to increase funding to Planned Parenthood of America. Now, for our part, I would never presume how Judge Amy Coney Barrett would rule on the Supreme Court of the United States, but we'll continue to stand strong for the right to life. When you speak about the Supreme Court, though, I think the American people really deserve an answer, Senator Harris. Are you and Joe Biden going to pack the court if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed? I mean, there have been 29 vacancies on the Supreme Court during presidential election years, from George Washington to Barack Obama. Presidents have nominated in all 29 cases. But your party is actually openly advocating adding seats to the Supreme Court, which has had 9 seats for 150 years, if you don't get your way. This is a classic case of if you can't win by the rules, you're going to change the rules. Now, you've refused to answer the question. Joe Biden has refused to answer the question. So I think the American people would really like to know, if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed at the Supreme Court of the United States, are you and Joe Biden, if somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way?
I'm so glad we went through a little history lesson. Let's do that a little more. In 1864...
Well, I'd like you to answer the question.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Okay. In 1864, one of the, I think, political heroes, certainly the president, I assume if you also, Mr. Vice President, is Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election. And it was 27 days before the election. And a seat became open on the United States Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln's party was in charge not only of the White House, but the Senate. But Honest Abe said it's not the right thing to do. The American people deserve to make the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And then that person can select who will serve for a lifetime on the highest court of our land. And so Joe and I are very clear. The American people are voting right now. And it should be their decision about who will serve on this most important body for a lifetime.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
People, Susan, are voting right now. They'd like to know if you and Joe Biden are going to pack the Supreme Court if you don't get your way in this nomination.
Let's talk about packing.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
Trying to answer you now.
American people deserve a straight answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the straight answer is they are going to pack the Supreme Court if they somehow win this election. Men and women, I got to tell you, people across this country, if you cherish our Supreme Court, if you cherish the separation of powers, you need to reject the Biden-Harris ticket. Come November the 3rd, re-elect President Donald Trump, and we'll stand by that separation of powers in a 9-seat Supreme Court.
Yeah, let's talk about packing the court then. Let's talk about the pack. Yeah, I'm about to. So the Trump-Pence administration has been, because I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Susan, as you mentioned, and I've witnessed the appointments for lifetime appointments to the federal courts, district courts, courts of appeal. People who are purely ideological, people who have been reviewed by legal professional organizations and found to have been not competent, are substandard. And do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court? Let's have that discussion.
All right, thank you, Senator. Let's go on and talk about the issue of racial justice.
I just want the record to reflect she never answered the question. So I think maybe the next debate, Joe Biden will answer the question, but I think the American people know the answer.
Thank you, Vice President. In March, Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician in Louisville, was shot and killed after police officers executing a search warrant in a narcotics investigation broke into her apartment. The police said they identified themselves. Taylor's boyfriend said he didn't hear them do that. He used a gun registered to him to fire a shot, which wounded an officer. More than 20 rounds into the apartment. They say they were acting in self-defense. None of them have been indicted in connection with her death. Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so, and I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family, and her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT to first learn what's going on out on the street, so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken unjustifiably and tragically and violently. And it brings me to, you know, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. And people around our country, of every race, of every age, of every gender, perfect strangers to each other, marched shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, fighting for us to finally achieve that ideal of equal justice under law. And I was a part of those peaceful protests. And I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. And that's why Joe Biden and I have said on this subject, look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana, and we will expunge the records of those who have been convicted of marijuana. This is the time for leadership on a tragic, tragic issue of unarmed black people in America.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, our heart breaks for the loss of any innocent American life. And the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system. a grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong. But you're entitled to your opinion, Senator. I think, look, and with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. Was burned to the ground by rioters and looters. And Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist, and that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you. And it is remarkable that when Senator Tim Scott tried to pass a police reform bill, brought together a group of Republicans and Democrats, Senator Harris, you got up and walked out of the room. And then you filibustered. You have to choose between supporting law enforcement, improving public safety, and supporting our African-American neighbors and all of our minorities. Under President Trump's leadership, we'll always stand with law enforcement, and we'll do what we've done from day one, and that is improve the lives of African-Americans.
Thank you, Vice President.
Record unemployment, record investments in education, and we'll fight for school choice for all of our members.
Thank you, Vice President.
I'd like to respond.
Senator Harris.
I will not sit here and be lectured by the Vice President on what it means to enforce the laws of our country. I am the only one on this stage who was personally prosecuted, everything from child sexual assault to homicide. I'm the only one on this stage who has prosecuted the big banks for taking advantage of America's homeowners. I'm the only one on this stage who prosecuted for-profit colleges for taking advantage of our veterans. And the reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days, where last week the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists. And it wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. He, on the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed, and on the other side there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs, killed. And on the other side there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said there were fine people on both sides. This is who we have as the President of the United States. And America, you deserve better. Joe Biden will be a president who brings our country together,
Senator Harris,
and recognizes the beauty in our diversity and the fact that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
Vice President Pence, let me give you a minute to respond.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that very much. You know, I think this is one of the things that makes people dislike the media so much in this country, Susan, is that you selectively edit, just like Senator Harris did, comments that President Trump and I and others on our side of the aisle make. I mean, Senator Harris conveniently omitted, after the president made comments about people on either side of the debate over monuments, he condemned the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, and has done so repeatedly. You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all of the American people. But you talk about having personally prosecuted. I'm glad you brought up your record, Senator.
Thank you.
But I really need to make this point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. Yeah. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Back on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Vice President.
We fought for educational choice and opportunities for African Americans, all of our members.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll do it for 4 months.
Thank you. You know, there is no more important issue than the final issue that we're going to talk about tonight, and that is the issue of the election itself.
He attacked my record. I would like an opportunity to respond.
Let me give you 30 seconds because we're running out of time.
I appreciate that. First of all, having served as the Attorney General of the state of California, the work that I did is a model of what our nation needs to do, and we will be able to do under a Joe Biden presidency. Our agenda includes what this administration has failed to do. It will be about not only instituting a ban on chokeholds and carotid holes.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
I would like to go through.
These are points that you made earlier in the hour, and I want to talk about the election itself before we have to.
But I want to talk about the connection between what Joe and I will do and my record, which includes I was the first statewide officer to institute a requirement that my agents would wear body cameras and keep them on full time. We were the first to initiate a requirement that there would be a training for law enforcement on implicit bias because, yes, Joe Biden and I recognize that implicit bias does exist, Mr. Vice President, contrary to what you may believe. We did the work of instituting reforms that were about investing in reentry. This is the work that we have done and the work we will do going forward. And again, I will not be lectured by the Vice President on our record of what we have done in terms of law enforcement and keeping our communities safe and a commitment to reforming the criminal justice system of America.
Thank you, Senator. Question on our final topic, the election itself. President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If your ticket wins and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what steps would you and Vice President Biden then take? What would happen next? You have 2 minutes.
So I'll tell you, Joe and I are particularly proud of the coalition that we've built around our campaign. We probably have one of the broadest coalitions of folks that you've ever seen in a presidential race. Of course, we have the support of Democrats, but also independents and Republicans. In fact, 7 members of President George W. Bush's cabinet are supporting our ticket. We have the support of Colin Powell, Cindy McCain, John Kasich, over 500 generals, retired generals, and former national security experts and advisors are supporting our campaign. And I believe they are doing that because they know that Joe Biden has a deep, deep-seated commitment to fight for our democracy and to fight for the integrity of our democracy and to bring integrity back to the White House. And so we believe in the American people. We believe in our democracy. And here's what I'd like to say to everybody. Vote. Please vote. Vote early. Come up with a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com. You can also go to joebiden.com. We have it within our power in these next 27 days to make the decision about what will be the course of our country for the next 4 years. And it is within our power, and if we use our vote and we use our voice, we will win. And we will not let anyone subvert our democracy with what Donald Trump has been doing, as he did on the debate stage last week, when again in front of 70 million people, he openly attempted to suppress the vote. Joe Biden, on the other hand, on that same debate stage, because clearly Donald Trump doesn't think he can run on a record because it's a failed record, Joe Biden on that stage said, hey, just please vote. So I'll repeat what Joe said. Please vote.
Thank you. Senator, Vice President Pence, President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. Responsibility as Vice President. What would you personally do? You have 2 minutes.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election. Because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, President Donald Trump has launched a movement of everyday Americans from every walk of life. And I have every confidence that those same Americans that delivered that historic victory in 2016, they see this president's record where we rebuild our military, we revived our economy through tax cuts and rolling back regulation, fighting for fair trade, unleashing American energy. We appointed conservatives to our federal courts at every level. And we stood with the men and women of law enforcement every single day. And I think that movement of Americans has only grown stronger in the last 4 years. But when you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing. When Joe Biden was Vice President of the United States, the FBI actually spied on President Trump and my campaign. I mean, there were documents released this week that the CIA actually made a referral to the FBI documenting that those allegations were coming from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And of course, we've all seen the avalanche, what you put the country through for the better part of 3 years until it was found that there was no obstruction, no collusion, case closed. And then Senator Harris, you and your colleagues in the Congress tried to impeach the President of the United States over a phone call. And now Hillary Clinton has actually said to Joe Biden that in her words, under no circumstances should he concede the election. So let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that will create a massive opportunity for voter fraud. We have a free and fair election. We know we're going to have confidence in it, and I believe in all my heart that President Donald Trump is going to be reelected for 4 more years.
You know, I've written all the questions that I've asked tonight, but for the final question of the debate, I'd like to read a question that someone else wrote in the state, to write essays about what they would like to ask you. And I want to close tonight's debate with the question posed by Brecklin Brown. She's an 8th grader at Springville Junior High in Springville, Utah. And here's what she wrote, quote, "When I watch the news, all I see is arguing between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizen fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are 2 candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along?" And then she added, "Your examples could make all the difference to bring us together," end quote. So to each of you in turn, I'd like you to take 1 minute and respond to Brecklin. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute.
Brecklin, it's a wonderful question. And let me just commend you for taking an interest in public life. I started following the news when I was very young. And in America, we believe in a free and open exchange of debate. And we celebrate that. And it's how we've created literally the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. I would tell you that don't assume that what you're seeing on your local news networks is synonymous with the American people. You know, I look at the relationship between Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice who we just lost from the Supreme Court, and the late Justice Antonin Scalia. They were on polar opposites on the Supreme Court of the United States. One very liberal, one very conservative. But what's been learned since her passing was the 2 of them and their families were the very closest of friends. I mean, here in America, we can disagree. We can debate vigorously, as Senator Harris and I have on this stage tonight. But when the debate is over, we come together as Americans. And that's what people do in big cities and small towns all across this country. So I just want to encourage you, Brecklin. I want to tell you that we're going to work every day to have government as good as our people. the American people each and every day. But we always come together and are always there for one another.
Thank you.
In times of need, and we've especially learned that through the difficulties of this year.
Senator Harris, what would you say to Brecklin?
First of all, I love hearing from our young leaders. And when I hear her words, when I hear your words, Brecklin, I know our future is bright because it is that perspective on who we are and who we should be. That is a sign of leadership and is something we should all aspire to be. And that, that brings me to Joe. Joe Biden, one of the reasons that Joe decided to run for president is after Charlottesville, which we talked about earlier. It so troubled him and upset him like it did all of us, that there was that kind of hate and division. What propelled Joe to run for president was to see that over the course of the last 4 years, what Brecklin described has been happening. Joe has a long-standing reputation of working across the aisle and working in a bipartisan way. And that's what he's going to do as president. Joe Biden has a history of lifting people up and fighting for their dignity. You have to know Joe's story to know that Joe has known pain, he has known suffering, and he has known love. And so, Brecklin, when you think about the future, I do believe the future is bright. And it will be because of your leadership, and it will be because we fight for each person's voice through their vote, and we get engaged in this election because you have the ability through your work and through eventually your vote to determine the future of our country and what its leadership looks like.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Vice President Pence. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank all. Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Vice President Pence. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank also the University of Utah for its hospitality, and most of all, our thanks to all the Americans who watched this debate tonight. Again, our best wishes for a quick recovery to President Trump, the First Lady, and everyone who is battling COVID-19. The second presidential debate is next week on October 15th, a town hall style debate in Miami. We hope you'll join us then. Good evening.
Here with you following the first and only vice presidential debate of this cycle. This will be an interesting turn of events to watch as both candidates are joined on stage by their spouses, both of them flanking moderator Susan Page. Kamala Harris set the tone early on within her first sentence about the administration's coronavirus response. She called it the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And indeed, Mike Pence had a tough job with a losing argument. We say that because of a death toll that has tonight climbed north of 210,000 of our federal citizens. Mike Pence said tonight from that stage, Donald Trump has put the health of Americans first, death toll numbers notwithstanding. He accused Democrats of playing politics with people's lives. Again, the death toll numbers notwithstanding. Social media held its own viewing party, as often happens. And on social media tonight, the talk was about an eye bleed that Mike Pence is apparently nursing, and the fly that hung out on the vice president for a good long time. A headline just issued by the New York Post about that. Indeed, the Republican Bill Kristol has awarded second place after Kamala Harris to the fly in this debate, but that verges on the silly. As a viewing event, a whole lot of people complaining about Mike Pence's inability or lack of desire to take a rap, take a cue, as we say in the television business, and finish up his answers. A time disparity noted by so many of the people watching. We will check the math. But I digress. To our friends, Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, Joy Reid, watching along with us. Take it away.
You know, I will say that what Brian was just saying about the fly, and the idling thing, they were visually distracting and strange things. I don't think we need to dwell on them. Everybody knows what they were, but those were the oddities of this debate. Two weird things. One thing, something going on with Mike Pence's eye and that fly that nested in his hair quite comfortably for the length of an entire question. Other than that, it was like a visit to normal politics land, which is fine and to be expected when it comes to Senator Harris, who has been a mainstream Democratic politician essentially her whole life, even though she's had an interesting sort of rise to the place that she's in right now in the party. But Mike Pence was visiting from another world in which the Donald Trump presidency is a normal Republican presidency, and he was defending it on normal Republican terms, which sort of, I think, would have made for potentially a consequential debate if Pence was describing a presidency that existed. Maybe that's the way it exists in his own mind, but it's not the presidency that we've all lived through. And so he was defending something that's nothing like what we've lived through.
Yeah.
Prior one where the candidates kind of ruined it for everybody.
Chris Wallace, there were a few points there where Kamala Harris kind of dodged some of the questions that were still lingering from the last debate, the question of packing the court. She also did not directly answer what, if any, restrictions she would place on abortion in California if Roe v. Wade was overturned. Just a couple of the times that I think some of those things landed without a finish. Your thoughts as you look back at tonight?
Oh, I think they both ducked a lot of questions, Martha. You know, while she ducked the question about what the restrictions or lack of restrictions would be in California, Mike Pence did exactly the same on restrictions in Indiana. I thought that her worst refusal to answer was exactly as you say on the packing of the court, but I thought that Pence had an equally egregious refusal to answer when he was asked, what would you do about protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and he absolutely refused to even discuss the issue. I thought both of them had a pretty good night. I thought that Kamala Harris's best point was when she was going after President Trump and Mike Pence on on health care and the effort to overturn Obamacare in the Supreme Court the week after the election. She said, if you have pre-existing conditions, they're coming after you. If you're one of the 20 million people on Obamacare, they're coming after you. If you're one of the people who's 26 or under, who's on your family's plan. I thought, on the other hand, that Pence was most effective when he went at Kamala Harris on the question of a left-wing agenda, that she and Biden would raise taxes as soon as they came in, and also that they would push their environmental, which he said, radical environmental agenda at the expense of American workers. I thought it was actually a pretty even night. I agree with Britt. I don't think it's going to change the narrative very much. I do want to say, though, it is the first debate I've ever seen where there was a bug crawling around on one candidate's head for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I don't think we can let this evening go without mentioning that.
Well, that's right. That was part of the visuals. Dana, another positive moment for Vice President Pence was when he articulated the takedown of al-Baghdadi and fighting ISIS, and his dismount was, this president does not hesitate to act when he needs to. As the motorcade is leaving the hall here, both motorcades, we should say, leaving Kingsbury Hall. Dana?
Well, first I'd say that Utah delivered what people said they wanted, which was a more genteel debate, a little bit more...
Is currently a hot zone.
I thought that was one of the most interesting things about the COVID section. The sort of hypocrisy of the Trump administration was right there for Kamala Harris to take advantage of, and she didn't, but she chose to do something else, pivoting it back to everyday Americans and their personal experiences with the virus. But when Mike Pence ignored the question about why Americans should follow the CDC rules, when the Trump administration flouted them in the Rose Garden, it felt like there was not any adequate response to sort of illustrate what was going on there. And so I see what she was trying to do. Talking directly to the American people, you know what you've been going through, but at the same time, we are living through a White House coronavirus hotspot, and it really didn't get brought up.
Absolutely. She was preparing, and we all spoke to sources around her to do exactly what she did. which does make sense to make a connection. Every single person in this country has a connection in some shape or form to coronavirus. But you gave one example. Another example was when Susan Page asked the vice president about whether or not it is our right as American citizens to know about the health of the president. And he completely ignored, I mean, he didn't even come close to answering the question. And no.
The beginning of the pandemic, that is not true. He was also asked about a ceremony in the Rose Garden several days ago that now looks like it was likely a super spreader event. He also said that that was mostly an outdoor event, when in fact there were large parts of it that were indoors. No masks, no social distancing.
Paula Reed, thank you. I thought that was a very interesting exchange, because I thought we heard for the first time when Mike Pence was asked to explain, it doesn't seem like you at the White House are following your own guidelines. And he said, well, we leave it up to the American people. We tell them what needs to be done, and then we leave it up to the American people to make their own judgment and to make their own decisions. I thought, even in that moment, I thought that he was deflecting. He never did answer the question about you're not following your own rules.
You know, it's interesting in what we learn about the things they didn't answer, the questions they didn't answer. So Kamala Harris didn't answer the question about court packing. She also didn't answer the question about what California should do if Roe v. Wade goes away. Mike Pence also didn't answer that question. He didn't answer a question about the president's health records. And most important to people who really care about the issues, he didn't answer the question about pre-existing conditions. He said the president has a health care plan. The president has been announcing the coming health care plan for his entire administration. It is yet to arrive.
Yes.
And so you can tell sometimes something about them by what they don't talk about.
I want to also bring in our panel. Reince Priebus is a CBS News.
State.
Within her, the vice president brought up Senator Harris's attack on a different judicial nominee for belonging to the Knights of Columbus. I believe that that was one thing they really wanted to get done tonight, which was to establish that Judge Barrett must not be subjected to a religious test next week. I think Mike Pence accomplished that, and accomplished a lot for the campaign in doing so.
And let's assume for a moment that the president is able to debate at the next debate. Did Vice President Pence build ground? Did he set the stage for the president to perhaps have a better debate performance?
Yeah, it's like a volleyball match at the Olympics. He put the ball in the air. The spike's got to come on the packing of the court. And I think if the president models on the way that the vice president conducted himself, I thought it was a very amicable debate within the norms of every debate I've ever seen. The last one was not. I know that Susan Page had trouble with both of them. I know she got rolled by Senator Harris at the end, but this was a normal debate. And I think it sets up the third debate very well.
Well, let me turn to David Plouffe, who, of course, was President Obama's senior advisor.
Change the race. I think Kamala benefited Joe Biden, and I think Mike Pence benefited Mike Pence in this debate. But I think when this all is said and done, people are going to look at it. They're in the midst of this COVID pandemic, and Mike Pence did not have any satisfactory answer about what was going on. And the prosecution of that part that Kamala did in that part of the debate, I think it was probably one of her most forceful points. Once you knew the truth, you knew the facts, and you didn't tell the American public, and this is what happened. So give the points to Kamala on this, but I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the race.
Matthew Dowd, thanks very much. Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Due tonight of helping the man at the top of the ticket.
You know, Pence had a much bigger challenge, I think, going into this debate. He had an uphill battle given the centrality of the coronavirus, and Harris really just had to do no harm given given Biden's lead in the polls. And I think when talking about the coronavirus, the vice president was constantly on defense and was weaker. And I think he did. I think he did a good job on jobs, energy, the economy, on China, and particularly on pressing Kamala Harris about whether the Biden administration would pack the Supreme Court. But overall, I think these vice presidential debates, they aren't going to move the needle. This was really interesting to see two people, as Jonathan mentioned, Kamala Harris could easily be president, and Mike Pence, a potential Republican contender in the near future. And to me, it was really most interesting to evaluate through that lens.
Well, coming back to you, Amy, on this question, I mean, to the extent Kamala Harris needed to prove tonight that make herself comfortable to the American people, that they could see her there as #2 with Joe Biden. Did she do that tonight?
I absolutely think that she did. What we didn't see, though, I mean, we've seen Kamala Harris, many voters have seen Kamala Harris as a prosecutor, whether it was in her role as senator, especially during the Kavanaugh hearings, or in other moments on the Judiciary Committee. But they haven't really seen her yet as a full-on candidate and her personality in the way we may have seen it by now in another time. Right? I think COVID has meant that we're spending very little time with the candidates in traditional settings, so we don't really have much of a filled-out version of who Kamala Harris is. And quite frankly, that wasn't her job tonight, and that's not really the job of the vice presidential candidate and vice presidential debate. Their job is to defend the top of the ticket, to prosecute the case. But I do think that at some point, and we may see it in this next debate, the presidential debate, where it's going to be very important, that the prosecuting of the case against Trump is not as much of the issue. It's selling the case for who they are and what they are going to do, they being the Biden-Harris ticket as the next administration. And I think that's where voters are really going to, what they're really going to be clamoring for is understanding a little bit more about what life would look like if they were in office.
And speaking of that, Jonathan Capehart, to the extent the vice president was going after Kamala Harris on the Green New Deal, on the fact, on his assertion that Joe Biden will raise your taxes on day one because he said he will repeal the Trump tax cuts. Do you think he made any headway in giving people pause about whether Joe Biden is going to make it tougher on people's livelihoods?
I don't think so. I really don't. Again, you know, what he said about the Green New Deal and what he said about a lot of other things were just sort of retreads of what we have been hearing for at least 2 years. And I think that Senator Harris was actually very effective in taking the attack and turning it into, okay, here's what we, the Biden-Harris ticket, are going to do in terms of the environment and in terms of jobs. My job here is not to recite everything that they would do, but I do think in response to questions and from Susan Page and in response to attacks from Vice President Pence, I think Senator Harris did a very good job of then taking the question, answering it a little bit, and then pivoting to here's what we're going to do, forward-looking, future-faced.
And finally, Eliana, in terms of the way the two of them came across in how they responded to questions or didn't, how they obeyed or didn't, what the rules were, looking at the camera, looking at the audience, how did they come across as people?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's more important than we might want to acknowledge. The format, as the other panelists mentioned, didn't really lend itself to interaction between the two, but I have to say I found both of them somewhat distracting in different ways. Kamala Harris seemed not to realize she was on a split screen, or if she did, wasn't doing a great job controlling her face, and I think her smirks and some of her grimaces were a little bit distracting. And in the same vein, the vice president had sort of a syrupy politeness that was clearly on offer, but he's a slow talker, but his going over time was also distracting. So this was nothing like what we saw last week in the debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden, where clearly personality was front and center. But I do think that there were small things that were distracting on both of their parts.
So
I particularly have a huge interest in healthcare policy. So for me, I would definitely want to know what is it that...
But it was, he said to...
Yes, they really did not like the ducking of questions. But they were so much happier with this debate than they were the first one. The first one to them was embarrassing. This one, at least, they had the decorum. But the frustration, and I'm engaging in this chat constantly throughout the 90 minutes, the complaint was they're ducking the question, they're pivoting. And so they're responding to the strategy of the candidates as opposed to the policies of the candidates. And that's the responsibility of the moderator, and it's the responsibility of both candidates to tell the American people what they need to know to make a decision. This is clearly a better debate than the first one. But to our undecided voters, I agree also with Britt that I don't think this will change many minds. But I don't want to leave you without being clear that that Mike Pence was the winner of tonight's confrontation.
Yeah, quickly, Frank, you said you've hit 15 undecided voters from key battleground states. There are a lot of people looking at this election saying, are there undecided voters, a lot of them, left?
Well, the answer is that they're not deciding on policy. They're deciding who they trust more, or to be more accurate, who they distrust less. These are people, the last remaining undecided, it's 6% of America in 11 states, which only represents 2.4% of the country. And frankly, we can never recruit them without having the internet and Zoom, because you can't find enough of them in any one place. But they are not making up their minds because policy does not drive them. Persona does. Who can I trust? Who has integrity? Who's going to answer the questions? Who's going to look me straight in the eye and tell me the truth? And they have issues with both campaigns. I will tell you that based on those criteria, that Mike Pence did do better than Kamala Harris this evening.
All right, Frank Luntz, we'll see you tomorrow with some of that panel.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. Thank you, Frank. So we're going to have some final thoughts from our panel, and then Sean Hannity coming up next.
The most animated person in the world. He's very slow and very deliberate and methodical in his speech. He's very careful. And at one point, going back to our earlier conversation, Rachel, about the cake, oh my God, there was so much syrup coming out of Pence tonight. Yeah. I don't have to buy another bottle of syrup for a lifetime, given what this guy was spewing. But that's his style. He slows it down. It's like a football game. You got the team that comes out and just wants to like score and boom, 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 and the other team that wants to slow the pace down because that's how they score their points. And that's essentially what he tried to do, was to slow the pace down, thinking that Kamala would be more prosecutorial, and anticipating that and sort of taking some of the air out of the room early, which I think he did rather effectively at times.
Yeah, the soporific style, I think, it does run out the clock. It does mean that you get to stammer your way through whatever you want to talk about in very slow terms for as long as you want until somebody forgets what the question is. I mean, it's a good tactic, but it is super boring, and it is hard to keep people focused on you when you're doing that in question after question. Control room, I have not run this by you, so this is a little unfair, but can you guys queue up SOT number 14, which runs about 20 seconds? I'd like to run, Senator McCaskill, I'd like to run this by you. You're talking about Senator Harris's style and her connection with people at home and people being comfortable with her. This was in the COVID section of the debate, Senator. I'd like to play this and then get your response to this in terms of how this worked tactically and whether this might resonate. Watch.
For life to get back to normal, Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine.
If Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Senator McCaskill, what did you think of that moment?
I thought it was perfect. I thought it was pitch perfect, because it was, sometimes short answers in debates are so much more effective than the droning on but then and on the American people. She really hit the point right on the head, and that is, if doctors and experts say it's safe, she's first in line. And by doing that, what she was saying to everyone, we all know that Trump is not listening to the doctors and the experts. And she said it in a way that didn't attack the president, but it really was effective at attacking the president. I thought it was very, very well done.
Senator, do you think overall that this isn't going to adjust the trajectory? That obviously Pence and Trump are behind in terms of the national polling and in terms of the swing state polling, and so they needed things to change more from this debate than Harris and Biden did. But do you think this nudges things in either direction in any particular state for either of the tickets?
Well, I don't want to repeat what I said before, but I think it bears underlining. Everybody in America knows these are two older candidates. And everybody in America knows in this particular election, maybe more than in other elections we've had in this country, knowing that the person that's vice president can do the job is important. And most Americans are not familiar with Kamala Harris. They've seen her since she got nominated, but they've never really seen her in this kind of environment particularly those people that don't watch primary debates. And those are the voters that are, you know, the little sliver that's left out there that could go either way. Those are the people that watch general election debates. So she needed to accomplish something tonight to make people comfortable with the idea that she is capable of doing the job of vice president, which by its very definition means she is capable of becoming president if that moment would come.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say though, I mean, I think to Claire's point, the opposite is also true. She understood the importance of that question, and Senator Harris answered it earnestly, trying to articulate why the vice president chose her and detailing her qualifications. Mike Pence was asked the same question. That was one of the questions that Susan Page put the same question to each of them. She didn't give them a different version. The president of the United States is sick. He's undergoing an experimental regimen of drugs that has White House sources saying things to the Times and the Post about whether that cocktail is causing dramatic mood swings. He still holds the nuclear codes. He didn't transfer power to Pence. And when Pence was given an opportunity to reassure the public, Susan Page just said, have you had any chats with him about his age? And we could add in his current health condition, which is
presidential disability.
He was hospitalized over the weekend, flown by helicopter to be hospitalized because his condition was so grave, in the words of his chief of staff. He didn't even dignify the question. And let me tell you something. The Trump supporters deserve an honest answer from Trump and Pence about whether they've had a conversation about under which circumstances would Pence step in and do the job. It doesn't mean Trump isn't president. It means when he's better,
why this is so painful and that maybe there would be a different tactic. Certainly with wearing a mask, we don't even have that.
In the 2016, President Trump won the senior vote by about 7 points. We've now seen that Joe Biden is winning the senior vote by 20 points, according to some of these polls. A lot has changed. It's not only the record on coronavirus, but also healthcare and other issues in the economy changing. There's lots still more to come in this, and we're going to continue to cover it here on CBS.
Is there a highlight? I would have to, I still keep going back to that fly. Because, you know, number one, I've never seen anything like that. It was a fly of color, too, that came at a very, very opportune time. And that is a Saturday Night Live skit waiting to happen on Saturday.
That fly.
Can't wait to see it.
All right. You heard it here first from Gayle King. Our coverage will continue on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. There will be more in your local news on this CBS station, and tomorrow on CBS This Morning. We'll be watching.
Yes.
I'm Nora O'Donnell, CBS News, Washington.
Colbert Goes Live with Mayor Pete Buttigieg tonight on CBS.
Get the latest news, break. The second on the ticket often doesn't really move the needle. Did you see anything tonight that makes you think that this will be an exception?
Well, I think it's almost the dog that did not bark, because if history tells us anything, Lester, the central question tonight was, does Kamala Harris, the candidate we haven't known, facing the biggest audience of her life, did she look and sound like a plausible president and vice president? The answer, at least from my point of view, she sure did. She passed that test. As for Mike Pence, people know him. He kept interrupting his moderator, a woman, and his opponent, a woman. Some may feel that showed lack of respect.
Yeah, that'll be something we'll see play out in the next day or two.
Right, but again, let's end as we started. I think a big sigh of relief that it was just, you know, in the realm of normal for a presidential or vice presidential debate. That concludes our coverage. A full calendar ahead. Of course, next Thursday, another presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in Miami.
For all of us at NBC News, thank you for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Pandemic. And we're going to see some warm temperatures here to end this week, but we do have a chance for rain coming up next Monday.
This is Dakota News Now.
Good evening, I'm Kelsey Passel. Brian is away from the desk this evening. Tonight, Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence went head-to-head in Salt Lake City, Utah for the first and only vice presidential debate of this election. The debate, with clear social distancing and COVID protections in place, was a much calmer scene than the presidential debate we saw a week ago. The candidates touched on fracking, the coronavirus, healthcare, and the economy, among other things. USD political science professor David Ernest says while the vice presidential debate doesn't typically carry much weight in the polls, it's still important, especially in a year where the presidential candidate's health has been questioned.
The questions of presidential succession are much more than theoretical tonight. I think voters and viewers tonight will be asking themselves, which of these candidates would I feel comfortable with as president should one of the presidential nominees become ill and or pass away?
President Trump's recent COVID-19 diagnosis has put the final 2 scheduled presidential debates in question, which means this could be the last time the 2 campaigns have a chance to directly make their case to the American people. Back at home, we are continuing our Meet the Candidates series ahead of the general election here on Dakota News Now.
A case.
In the final day of oral arguments, the South Dakota Supreme Court heard a case involving Joshua Vorthrams. He was involved in a crash in July of 2017.
It was indeed low on some supplies, Wolf.
We did, our producers did some math that they found that nearly identical speaking times for these 2 candidates. Take a look at this, 36 minutes, 24 seconds for Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, 36 minutes, 27 seconds. Very, very equal amounts of time. Jake, Dana, Abby, back to you guys.
Thanks, Wolf. We were talking before about whether or not Senator Kamala Harris left some opportunities on the table purposely, because perhaps she went into the debate knowing of some gender and racial roles and dynamics that make women, make people of color have to hold back. Not that they should, but that they feel like they have to in this country. And a source close to the campaign after we had this conversation texted me and said that Senator Harris went into the debate aware of the various dynamics that we talked about, racial and gender dynamics, and knowing she had to thread the needle on balancing being assertive and letting it go at points. Women are judged differently. It's a needle we have to thread all the time. And of course, she has been the only woman and the only black woman in many spaces. So just what we were talking about.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you know, she's had to thread, she has had to thread that line several times in the past. One of the interesting differences between tonight compared to what we've come to see from Kamala Harris in the primary debates was that she became known for creating moments, whether it was with Joe Biden or at other debates, even known for creating moments in the Judiciary Committee hearings.
With Attorney General Barr.
Exactly. We didn't see that Kamala Harris tonight. We saw a different Kamala Harris tonight, in part, I'm told, because the objective here was very different. She came in here believing that it was about holding her own, steady, stable, executing on the plan, not creating, you know, social media moments that people have come to expect from her. And that might be a disappointment, frankly, to some of her fans on Twitter. But from the perspective of the campaign, I think you'll hear a lot of people saying, in terms of what they prepared for, she executed on that.
Although I'm still speaking was a line that is very memorable. Yeah. People who are near her are, you know, happy that that was something that she got out. She obviously prepared that for when the vice president was going to interrupt her, and I can see that resonating a lot with women. You know, that here was, you know, a guy on the stage with her trying to kind of talk over her, and she stopped him and she looked at him and she said, "I'm still speaking." I can already see the Biden campaign making a T-shirt out of that.
Yeah, a couple things. I think I agree with Senator Santorum, who I can't help but notice is a lot more excited about talking about Vice President Pence than he has been about talking about Pence's running mate. But I think I agree with him in the sense that she played it safe. But that's what you would expect if you believe the polls. The Biden-Harris campaign is winning.
Will you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking your first day in office, adding the United States to the list of countries who have banned this devastating practice?
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yeah.
I'm in favor of banning fracking. Joe Biden, I'll eliminate fracking. They said it. Now both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are on record denying their own words. And by the way, following those remarks, Ocasio-Cortez, well, she sent a very stern reminder to Kamala Harris on Twitter, writing, "Fracking is bad, actually." And meanwhile, when Senator Harris was finally forced to answer for Biden's cozy relationship with China, Harris tried to dodge that question. Take a look at this.
Joe, I think he said it quite well. He says, you know, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships. And so we know this in our personal and professional relationships. You got to keep your word to your friends. You got to be loyal to your friends. People who've stood with you, you got to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check.
Well, the vice president was nicer than I would have been because we know that Joe is loyal to his friends. You know, like the people in Ukraine where a zero-experience hunter made millions of dollars, or China where a zero-experience hunter got a $1.5 billion deal with the Bank of China. I guess that's loyal to your friends. Now, why on earth would Senator Harris or Joe Biden ever have anything negative to say about China? After all, Joe Biden has been sucking up to China for decades, and that's likely the reason that zero-experience hunter has been lining his pockets with sweetheart deals connected to the Communist Party of China for years, and shopping sprees thanks to Chinese nationals, or Ukrainian oligarchs, or Russian oligarchs, as we've only recently learned. And according to that U.S. Senate report that was put out by Charles Grassley and Senator Johnson, Hunter Biden actually opened a joint bank account with a Chinese national. Guess why? To fund a $100,000 shopping spree for members of Hunter's family. He also reportedly scored lucrative multi-million-dollar business deals with foreign nationals associated with China's Communist Party and also China's military. And during the Obama administration, State Department officials, they were openly worried that Hunter's problematic activities and business dealings create serious counterintelligence and extortion concerns. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing, maybe that's why for the first part of, let's see, through January, the end of January, when the president put the travel ban in effect, 10 days after the first identified case of corona in America, Joe Biden called it xenophobic and hysterical and also fear-mongering. Why? Maybe he wanted more deals for Hunter. But tonight, by far, the most cringeworthy, disturbing moment of the debate came when Kamala Harris did everything she could do not to answer whether or not she or Joe Biden support packing the U.S. Supreme Court, something that hasn't happened in over 150 years. We've always had 9 members on the court. Well, apparently there's a reason they won't answer. Take a look at this.
Thank you, Senator Harris. People, Susan, are voting right now. They'd like to know if you and Joe Biden are going to pack the Supreme Court if you don't get your way in this nomination.
Let's talk about packing.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
Trying to answer you
the
now.
American people deserve a straight answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the straight answer is they are going to pack the Supreme Court if they somehow win this election.
This is beyond a serious topic. Why? Because we have co-equal branches of government. We have checks and balances, and whether or not all 3 co-equal branches of government will survive a potential Biden-Harris administration. And Senator Harris thinks that she can just punt? Well, that's pretty unconscionable. What would that mean? That would mean, well, radical justices on the U.S. Supreme Court in what, perpetuity? They're going to put 11 on the court, 13 on the court? How about go for a nice even 18? That would be pretty repulsive, because what people can't get done legislatively or can't get done at the ballot box by convincing the American people, they would hope activist justices do from the Supreme Court. The American people deserve an answer. And given, by the way, her dodgy remarks, you better believe that that certainly is on the table. And by the way, just like getting rid of the legislative filibuster and pushing for statehood for Puerto Rico and D.C. if they get elected, more questions they need to answer. Because if elected, that would mean a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate, probably in perpetuity. That means this would be the most radical, destructive administration in American history, and they don't want to 27 days outside of an election be honest and forthright and transparent with the American people. If you do care about constitutional order, if you care about co-equal branches of government, if you care about checks and balances, if you care about something called the Bill of Rights, your freedoms, your pursuit of happiness, well, vote like your country depends on it, because apparently it does in 27 days.
Disservice to Donald Trump just by the stark contrast between the two of them, just in the way they handle themselves on the stage. Although, you know, without Donald Trump, Mike Pence would have been the rudest debater we've seen working this particular campaign so far.
Eugene Robinson, I don't know that we are allowed to ask a Pulitzer Prize recipient to go ahead and write his column on live television, but I just did.
Well, you've done it before, actually, Brian, so you're excused. Look, I think what was, in many ways, what's notable about this debate is what didn't happen. Neither really went after the other in the way that we certainly know Senator Harris can, because we saw her do it during the Democratic debates, and Mike Pence certainly could at least try to do. But it's interesting. I think there are like different reasons for that too. I mean, if you're Kamala Harris and the polls are showing your guy 9.5 points ahead or whatever the average is right now, and things are looking pretty good, you don't have to take that haymaker that might leave you exposed in some way. You can, you pick your punches, but you don't have to swing for the fences. But if you're Mike Pence and if you're looking at you're behind by 9 points or so, I kind of wondered why he didn't take more chances. He didn't take very many chances in the debate, and maybe that's just not his style. But it also occurred to me that maybe he's thinking 4 years hence. Maybe he's thinking a little bit or almost as much about 2024 as he's thinking about 2020.
James, back to you, because there's going to be a lot of talk about that. That would assume that a reformed Republican Party, in the event of a Trump-Pence loss, in the event of, say, a change in power in the Senate, that would assume that a reformed Republican Party would fancy Mike Pence at the top of their ticket 4 years from now.
Well, I think Gene made the point. This was the first debate of the 2024 cycle. It was probably a debate, and even if the vice president said one term, and Harris runs, she's not going to run unopposed. It's going to be a vigorous contest on the Democratic side also. I thought she helped herself more for 2024 than Pence helped himself. But I did view this as the first debate of the 2024 primary cycle. And I think that the two of them and their two staffs probably viewed it the same way. But the other thing is, how many times did Susan Page say, "Thank you, Mr. Vice President"? I think it was over 100. I was trying to count. But yeah, I'll never be able to sleep because it'll just ring in my face. But yes, you have to be conscious of 2024 because they're sizing these people up already. I hate to say that, but that's politics. You're always looking to the next one.
Let's get more reaction from the man who's standing by to talk to us, who actually played the part of Mike Pence during debate prep with Senator Harris, because he has debated both Mike Pence and Senator Harris in the past. Former Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg, who joins us from Salt Lake City. Mr. Mayor, dual question. Number one, how do you think your client and friend did tonight? Number two, looking back, did you throw it all in? Did you get it all right? Did you leave it all on the field when you were portraying Mike Pence? Were there any surprises that were not on your list?
First of all, I'm so proud of Kamala Harris. She made such a powerful and direct case, got right past the sort of Trump Twitter noise machine to speak to the American people about what we know to be true. The VP kept trying to create this picture that everything's going along just fine in America. And she poked right through that, explaining how the failures of this presidency had led us to where we are. And I think doing a great job of reminding us not only what we're against, but what this ticket is for, what Joe Biden and she and a Democratic administration could do to invest in infrastructure and give us a fairer economy and make sure that we're expanding health care. It was a command performance. As far as Vice President Pence, I viewed it as my job to do everything I could to throw every curveball and just make sure she was prepared for the kinds of things he would say, because it is difficult to prepare to debate somebody who will be perfectly happy to say something that's not true in a smooth, calm, reassuring tone, like it's God's honest truth. The only real surprise, I would say, was the disrespect that he showed for the moderator and for the rules. You know, he's generally somebody who tries to be very gentlemanly, and I don't know if that was a factor of being spooked by what's going on in the polls. I don't know if he was trying to impress his boss. You know, often there's an audience of one that you have to think about if you're part of the Trump machine. That was the one thing that happened more than I would have guessed. Although he does have a certain knack for, as we saw in 2016, for interrupting without making it look like he's interrupting. But besides that, you know, what we really saw was kind of the same old effort to make it sound as if everything's going great in the worst pandemic response in the world and in this economic calamity. He clearly was not able to do what he needed to do tonight. Which was to somehow change the dynamic of the race or to have a huge win. He gave a defense of the president that was loyal, but I also felt a little bit lifeless.
Let's go back to the point you just made, and let's call it Pence-splaining. His game is to use a combination of kind of certitude and piety to control his pace of speaking, to control his manner of speaking, and you are not alone. A good many people noticed that dynamic tonight. First of all, the math, the times he went over allotted times that were never seemingly paid back to Kamala Harris. But I guess I'm asking, was it painfully obvious to you in her camp backstage watching in real time?
It was very obvious, although I should say I was in the hall. I didn't even find out about this famous fly until after it was all over. But it was certainly something you couldn't escape, just because he kept repeatedly running over her. And you know, it was hard not to think about the gender dynamics on the stage, and conscious that I'm you know, I've found debates very challenging, and I know that I'm debating as a man and as a white candidate. I think it's also worth mentioning that you know, she was carrying the weight of history in a lot of ways on that stage tonight, and did it so well and so effectively.
I also wanted to ask you, it appeared that Trump during the debate tweeted something about our servicemen, our remaining servicemen and women in Afghanistan being home by Christmas. That is a meaningful thing, as no one needs to remind you. That's a big deal to loved ones of our men and women in a far-flung and dangerous place like Afghanistan. Do you think matters military got the airing tonight that they should have?
Well, you know, I'm glad that there was at least a little bit of discussion of the importance of the regard and the respect that a commander-in-chief ought to have for those who serve. And, you know, there needed to be a moment of accountability for this president, referring to our war heroes and our war dead as suckers and losers for the way he's talked about prisoners of war like John McCain. And she was able to, I think, deliver that and call him to account. Nothing would be better than for us to have a stable, peaceful end to the Afghanistan conflict and bring folks home. I'm messaging just today with friends, some of whom are gearing up for another tour in the Middle East. And you know, there's been coverage about now kids picking up you know, patrols that their parents served, or going into the conflict where their parents served, because it's been 19 years. You get old enough to enlist and have been born after this conflict started. Of course, whenever this president says a certain thing's going to happen by a certain date, often, if not most of the time, that turns out not to be true. But this is one case where I hope and pray that what we heard is actually accurate.
Pete Buttigieg, knowing something about the schedule you've been on and the day you've had, thank you very much for reserving time for us at the end of your day after this event tonight. Greatly appreciate you joining our coverage. Our coverage is going to take its first break. More of our special extended edition of our broadcast tonight following this vice presidential debate with those four friends of our broadcast right after this.
American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease.
words. Put them all together, you have a story.
Story.
Captain, why are you doing this? No girl is lost. I'm returning her to her surviving family.
Commercial market since 2002. Optimize your performance with Digital.
This month, Levitt at the Falls will reboot its popular virtual concert series, Levitt in Your Living Room. Well, the pandemic has forced the nonprofit to find creative ways of bringing music to the community in a safe manner. As Perry Groten reports in tonight's Eye on KELO, organizers are already working to bring outdoor concerts back to the Lebanon lawn next year.
Activities on the Levitt stage in downtown Sioux Falls have been limited to some whimsy in the wind during this year of pandemic.
Oh, to be out here on the lawn is just a joy. We've missed it so much. Can't wait till next year.
There's anticipation for next year because Levitt at the Falls is planning on resuming outdoor concerts on the stage that were put on hold this year due to the coronavirus.
People are socially distancing. You know, people are wearing their masks. So we'll do our best to do it safely. You know, if things change and we can't do it safely, we'll stop. But I do think we have to try.
The pandemic forced Levitt at the Falls to pivot to other musical outlets, including the pop-up concerts Levitt in Your Neighborhood series. Each Unlind of the Sioux Falls Chamber Music Collective was part of this summer's lineup.
I was so happy when I got asked to perform this summer, just because that was the moment I've been craving for and the special connection, and I just felt really fortunate.
Lynn also performed an opening act at the Levitt Shell last year. She's excited about the prospects of a return of the concerts downtown next year.
Once we bring the live music back, I think it'll be even more fun for people to be able to connect online and in person as well.
The Levitt's online connection to audiences has been Levitt in Your Living Room, a series of virtual concerts that music lovers have embraced around the country and the globe.
We've had almost 75,000 views now from people in 30 states and 4 countries. So the response has been far greater than we expected.
Levitt in Your Living Room is taking a pause for the cause, but will resume in October for monthly performances through March. By then, the nonprofit should have a good idea who will be performing on the Levitt Band Shell in 2021.
You know, we had such a dynamic lineup ready for this year, and most of those artists were so excited to come that we said, well, let's just move dates. Let's just put it on the calendar, see what we can make happen for next year.
Whether it's on stage or online or in neighborhoods, organizers say it's important for the Levitt program to have a year-round presence in the community.
Those of us who are lovers of music love to watch the performance, but what we have to remember is that this is the lifeblood of these musicians, and we feel really, really lucky that we've been able to employ over 50 musicians through this process, which is, you know, just really something that needs to continue to happen.
Because the Levitt stage is on city property, the concerts would have to follow city protocols on masks and social distancing. Ideally, Levitt at the Falls would like to host 50 concerts next year, but that number is in flux due to uncertainties over the pandemic. Alverson is confident the community will embrace the healing powers of music whenever the performers return to the Levitt stage.
And it's just been really great to get out there and be with people and let music do what it does best, which is really heal our souls.
With Eye on KELO, I'm Perry Groten.
And you can check out all the upcoming Levitt events by going to its website. We have a link for you under the story at KELOland.com.
Medication, it's absolutely zero threat to any sexual partner. None if they're on medication. They cannot transmit the virus. In America, in several states, they can be sent to jail because of that. Donald Trump is out there possibly infecting people. He could have infected Joe Biden on the stage, again, and it's not he's not held responsible.
I'm not arguing with you about the president's character. I'm arguing about the policy decisions.
Right. And he's putting his thumb.
The character. What's happened to him in this country and in our politics is that his character now, the cost of it is clear. When you subjugate public interest to your political interest to the degree this president has on this virus, and people's lives are lost because of it. That's not just a character problem. That's a policy problem.
Hold on. Are you telling me that Barack Obama followed every advice from every advisor he ever had and never changed it if an advisor came forward? That's a,
let me tell you something. On public health issues, he took his guidance from public health experts, and that is the difference.
Well, let me just say one thing on policy, because just recently, maybe it was yesterday, the President of the United States tweeted, or maybe it was today, tweeted that the FDA was slowing down purposefully and without any scientific reason, apparently, he thinks, the vaccine because it insisted on going through a couple of months of approval process. So you have a President of the United States, everyone wants a vaccine.
Complained about an agency.
Everyone wants a vaccine in this country, but you have the President telling the scientists and the doctors they don't know what they're doing and that they are somehow slowing it down for political reasons. This was his, you know, this was his insinuation, or maybe he stated it flatly.
But what happened?
They did it.
They did.
They did what they wanted to do. But, you know, but who knows what Donald Trump's next step is, because does he have the power to overrule the FDA? So maybe he will. Stay tuned.
All right, let's go back to Wolf. We'll have more ahead.
All right, Anderson, thank you. Undecided voters often watch these debates, like the one we saw tonight, to try to help them make up their minds. We have a group of undecided voters in the battleground state of Arizona. They've been watching the vice presidential debate. Sarah Seidner is with them in Phoenix. So, Sarah, what did the voters think of the candidates' performance?
Yeah, it's really interesting. They thought it was a good debate overall, but let's ask them. Let's go ahead and talk to Tyler here. You're 19 years old. This is your first time voting in a presidential election. In one word, describe to me the performance of Vice President Pence.
Shifty.
Shifty, okay. And now we're going to go back behind you to Deborah. Deborah, tell me, you have in the past, I think you voted for President Trump back in 2016. You are now on the fence, undecided. In one word, describe to me what you thought of Vice President Pence's performance.
Confident.
Okay. So you've got Tyler Shifty, we've got Deborah, who is saying confident. Let's go back now here to, let's see, who is in the back here? Sam. Sam, you're back here. I saw you a little bit nodding and engaging as you're watching this. One word to describe how Vice President Pence did.
Not sincere.
Okay. So Shifty, confident, not sincere. Morgan, front row. You were very engaged as well. I was watching you going up and down with your device. What did you think of Vice President Pence in one word?
Stubborn.
Stubborn. Okay. All right, Judy, we've got you back here. You voted for President Trump, I think, in 2016. Is that right?
Yep.
You're on the fence, but leaning towards Trump. What did you think of his vice president?
Overtime.
What did you say?
Overtime. He kept stealing her time.
Okay. So going with time. Taking, you know, interrupting and going with time. Okay. All right. Joseph, you are back here. I think you are leaning towards Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What did you think of Vice President Trump's performance?
He was evasive.
Evasive. Okay. All right. We have Bob here, who's sitting in the front. Bob, you were listening intently. What did you think of the Vice President?
Polished.
Polished. Okay. Very positive reaction to how he performed tonight. Okay. Anessa, you have sort of talked to me a little bit about how important this vice presidential debate is to you. What did you think of Vice President Pence?
Calculated.
Calculated. Okay. Now we have you, Cody. You're also a first-time voter for the presidential election. You were leaning, I think, towards Trump. What did you think of his vice president?
Confident.
Confident. So we've got two confidents. And last but certainly not least, Dennis, you've been sitting back here patiently, ready to talk. One word to describe Vice President Pence.
I'll describe it as consistent, because there was nothing new, no surprises.
Okay. Nothing new and no surprises. And we should also mention that there weren't any really huge moments except for one, and we'll talk about that in a bit. I also should mention that we have talked to these folks and sort of canvassed them about whether or not this debate has helped them decide who they're going to vote for in the 2020 election. Got some good answers. I'm going to toss it back to you, Wolf and Anderson.
You know, the undecided voters, Sarah, they had 9-7 as we go to the scoreboard.
So they stay alive, trailing 2-1 in that series. Tampa Bay beats the Yankees 8-4. They're up 2-1 in that series. In the National League, Atlanta 1 win away from sweeping Miami Marlins, and the Dodgers are leading 4-3 in the 7th inning and 1-0 in their series as well. And finally, the Lakers 1 win away from their 17th NBA title, which would tie my Boston Celtics. LeBron and Anthony Davis combining for 50 points last night as they beat the Heat 102-96. Miami was playing its second straight game without Goran Dragic, although they did have this guy, Duncan Robinson, the bank for 3. The former Skyforce sniper poured in 17 for Miami, but the Lakers were just too good on this night. Anthony Davis had 22, and LeBron had 28. They go on to win 102-96 and lead the series 3-1. That final game is Friday night. We'll be right back.
There are a lot of places to buy flooring.
Line. I mean, seriously, look at the videotape. She was just squirming around. And you know what? She even played the race card on the Supreme Court packing. Bravo to Mike Pence. When she tried to answer that question, she started talking about race relating to who Donald Trump selected on the Supreme Court. I mean, on the other court level, haven't been a single black. She was trying to even play the race card on the Supreme Court issue. She got caught lying, and I'll tell you right now, she's not qualified to be a vice president. And I think the American public saw that tonight. Mike Pence was well-knowledge. He knew the facts. He knew policies. You didn't even hear a single policy uttered from her. And the first question asked by Susan Page was, will you shut down the economy? Will you require masks? She wouldn't even answer that question. She was 0 for 12 regarding expressing policy of the so-called Biden-Harris administration.
Geraldo.
It's funny that Joe Biden says that Charlottesville made him run for president. He's been running for president at least since the 1980s. He's been running for president really for the 47 years he's been in public life, I think.
But they also
this was an audition for Kamala Harris.
But Geraldo, I want you to hone in on this. Lying about an issue like race, when you have videotape that proves otherwise, that's a serious issue. Lying about fracking, lying about serious, taxes.
But it is. I think you're burying the lead, though, Sean. The only real mistake Kamala Harris made tonight was over-smirking, over-smiling. She had to sell herself to the American people as not a scary lady, that she would be a competent, believable, credible vice president. I think that she passed that threshold. I think that the vice president's only sin tonight was over-talking. People, I think, that, get annoyed when the moderator says stop 3 or 4 times. In terms of the specific issues, I think it's all about the impression. I think that this was a tie. I think that Kamala did better on Let me finish. Kamala did better on the $750 taxes he paid in COVID, obviously. The vice president did better on almost everything else, stacking the court. She was rattled on China, the only time she was really rattled. The vice president scored on the economy, on taxes. I don't know why the president and vice president haven't hit the fact that black people is the lowest it's
What
ever
debate
been.
did he watch?
I don't know what debate you watched.
What debate did he watch?
Let me go to Governor Huckabee. Hang on. Governor Huckabee, who himself is unflappable on a debate stage and one of the quickest debaters. I watched her lie about taxes. I watched her lie about fracking. I watched her lie about the issue of race. And she won't answer a fundamental question about something as profound as stacking the court. I thought that Mike Pence shook her multiple times to her core, and she was visibly shaken.
I tend to agree, and I'm not sure. I really think, I love Geraldo. He's got to get to an ophthalmologist tomorrow as quickly as he can. Yes. He absolutely did not see the same debate that Leo and I and the rest of America saw. Mike Pence was even-handed. He was calm. He was very direct. I do think sometimes, he may have hurt himself slightly by continuing to talk when his time was up, but he had good points. And Kamala Harris was simply shaken by the things that he said. I think the most important thing that happened tonight, first of all, he pinned her back on issues like fracking, taxes. and also on packing the court. She never could answer it. I also believe that the best answer he had was near the end on not accepting the election results, when he said, I'll tell you who hadn't accepted the election results, the Democrats, who for 4 years are still unable to get over 2016. That was the coup de grace. I thought that that was the finishing mark of the whole evening.
Let me go back to Leo, you responding to Geraldo. I'll let you two go at it for a minute, because I think, Geraldo, I love you, but you missed the whole thing here. When you're caught in outright lies, that is devastating, because those become campaign ads. When you won't answer fundamental questions about our Constitution, and she'd never been challenged until tonight, because she's gotten a pass from the mob and the media. I think this now has raised a whole variety of questions now that I think the American people are going to want answered. Are they going to...
Oh, come on. I mean, come on. Yeah. Everyone in this country, Frank Lutz, everyone, all the polling indicates that Kamala Harris lost, and it was on full display. Mike Huckabee, Sean Hannity, everyone in this country saw it. Geraldo, look, maybe you want to be apologetic to her for whatever reason, but on the issues, on the factual issues, on the Green New Deal, she lied.
I don't know if you noticed.
She was a liar.
She is a historic figure, and I think you have to give some due deference to the fact that she is a historic figure. Now,
no. We're not here for symbol. We're not here for symbol.
Every poll, you mentioned the poll. Let me make 1 second. You mentioned the polls. Every poll that we've seen in the last 24, 48 hours have shown the GOP, President Trump and Mike Pence are double digits behind.
That has nothing to do with tonight. You're changing the subject.
He had to crush her tonight, and he had to do it in a way that was convincing that she could not be vice president. That did not happen. She held her.
I need a drink.
Hang on.
You didn't see the same thing I saw.
Mike, let me bring up something else here. This did not come up tonight. She is now for defunding the police. She compared ICE to the KKK. She, in the debate with Joe Biden, accused Joe of coddling the reputations of segregationists like Robert Byrd. She said she wouldn't be a member of the U.S. Senate if those men that Joe Biden praised had their way. She also, by the way, supported this Minnesota Defense Fund.
She blocked Tim Scott on the police reform bill. She blocked Tim Scott on the police reform bill, Geraldo. What about that?
This is now substance.
That's a good point. I think that Governor Huckabee's point is a better point, that whenever the Republicans ask Donald Trump if he's going to give up his seat, just hit the Democrats and say, you haven't allowed Donald Trump a minute of peace in the whole time he's been president. You've, with this funny Russia hoax, you've tried your best to undermine him. What's that impeachment? When you should have been concentrating on COVID, you were worried about this phony impeachment.
Huckabee,
I think that the Republicans have a way to hit back.
Governor.
I feel like I'm debating Kamala Harris and Mike Pence right now. Let me just add this. I think the most amazing thing that I wish somehow could have come out tonight is asking Kamala Harris, you went to the hospital bed in Wisconsin of a man who was accused of sexual assault of a woman when you said we ought to believe the women. How come you didn't believe that one? But when 2 cops in your own state were shot in the face by a cowardly thug, why didn't you go to the hospital room? And then you said you were proud of the man in Wisconsin who was accused of sexual assault. Were you proud of the 2 cops in your own state? And if you weren't, why weren't you proud of them? That's what I wish we could have punched with tonight, because
that's a great argument. What this debate was about. This debate was about whether a suburban housewife or houseman would be scared to death.
What are you talking about? We're talking about the debate. We're talking about today's debate.
All right, I got to move on.
As he really doesn't. But I have to kind of agree with David overall. I think Nothing Burger magazine has a pretty good cover story. These vice presidential debates normally don't matter that much. And this whole race is about Donald Trump getting clobbered because female voters don't like him by huge margins. So did anything happen tonight to move suburban voters, college-educated women, back to Donald Trump? And I'd say through the tone and everything, net, no. So it's a good night for Joe Biden because nothing changed and Biden's in a commanding position. I thought occasionally she wobbled. I thought he kind of blitzed her at the beginning, but she rallied and she got the biggest soundbite, which we heard on the bump in. They're coming for you, which is right down the alley on the issue of health care and pre-existing conditions, which the Democrats would love to debate every day for the rest of the campaign.
And David Plouffe, indeed, as opening quotes go, the one I wrote down in her first sentence, the coronavirus response was the greatest, continues to be the greatest failure of any presidential administration. If you're the incumbent VP, that's a tough one to come back from. But then again, to all the souls we've lost, so is a death toll of 210,000 and rising.
Right, Brian. Well, listen, I think the American people have already rendered their verdict on what they think of Trump and Pence's handling on this, and they think it's a disaster. So, you know, Trump has his talking points. Pence had his talking points tonight. Trump will have his story last week. But listen, far more important to this presidential election than the debate tonight has been the last week. And I don't think there's been a presidential candidate who's had a worse 7 days than Donald Trump. He had a disastrous debate last Tuesday, which showed his already alarming poll numbers getting worse. He gets diagnosed with the coronavirus, holding a super spreading event at the White House, a coronavirus he has downplayed. It would be like back in 1938 if Neville Chamberlain, in addition to appeasing the Germans, also got held captive. So the big thing is the big thing, and I think that's going to be the big issue all the way in. And the other thing I'd say is, you know, Trump not wearing a mask when he came back, these videos he's putting out, which are basically, you know, going to cause people to die. I'd assume those are going to be a big part of the debate if it happens next week in Florida. And Joe Biden really, really needs to prosecute that case against Trump.
Mike Murphy, do you agree with me that Trump says very little by accident, and we can usually tell when he rolls out what will later become the stuff of repetition, his talking points? When he got back from the hospital, he looked at the camera and said, maybe I'm immune, maybe not. Today, he, knowing it was a therapeutic, he claimed his medicine regimen was chosen by him, and he called it a cure. Something tells me we're going to hear that a lot.
Oh, totally. I mean, his dream for this election, and it's been this for weeks, is that he can declare the COVID-19 pandemic over. Dr. Trump has now prescribed a miracle cure for everyone, and rotate to the economy. The economy tonight is where Pence actually scored a little bit on Harris, so they would like the whole campaign to be about that, but I don't think the virus takes orders from the president, despite whatever Superman fantasy he was working on the balcony the other night. So it's definitely the intent, though, and it's definitely what they're trying to do. Now, I'll tell you just one oddity of the debate. Somebody who might need a cure tomorrow is Mike Pence, and not for COVID-19. Our friends over at Fox tonight were declaring, why can't Trump debate as well as Pence? No chillier and scarier words have ever been spoken if you're the vice president, because the one thing Donald Trump, as we all know, can't stand is anybody to upstage him. So I think it could be a long week just for Donald Trump in the inside game now at the White House.
David Plouffe, as a leading Democrat, what worries you about impediments to the vote? Are you watching individual states? Are you watching individuals? Obviously, I think the number is about 5 million of us have voted early.
Well, Brian, a good campaign worries about everything. Now, we shouldn't be dishonest about the race. You know, Joe Biden's lead is significant. It's stable. He's got leads in probably 8 to 10 battleground states. He, depending on the combination, may only need to win 2 of them. But yes, the question is, can you get people all the way through the funnel? People who say they're going to register where there are still registration deadlines open. People who get their absentee ballot, are they going to make a mistake? If they go to vote early, and we saw in Arizona today, long lines, or people making a plan to stay in line, are they making a plan for Election Day? So the actual execution of turning professed support into vote, that is what a campaign is all about. Joe Biden's in a good position where I think he's got enough support to win the presidency. Can it materialize in vote? But again, Brian, you mentioned over 5 million Americans have voted. That number will grow every day. Election Day is 5 days earlier this year than it was in 2016. So just simple mathematics, when you are losing a race by anywhere from 6 to 10 points and people are voting, It means you have to overperform in the back end. It just makes your degree of difficulty harder. But sure, if I'm the Biden campaign, my biggest concern right now is I just want to make sure that I'm not losing votes, either through mistakes or from people who ultimately don't turn out. And I do think Trump's going to get his turnout. That's the one thing I've been sure about this entire time. I don't think that's enough to win, particularly given his performance, where I think he's kind of repelled swinging undecided voters, particularly women. But that's the biggest concern right now, and it's why you can't rest easy if you're the Biden campaign.
Dynamics of the political landscape, and to say it that, bluntly, might not be the best thing for the kinds of voters that they're trying to reach now. Not the voters that they already have, the kinds of voters that they're trying to reach now.
But that's so, I still find that to be so interesting, because ultimately, Republicans make the argument that the courts are such a strong issue for them. It is a galvanizing issue for their voters. Although we should note, a lot of recent polling shows Democrats are at least equally motivated by the courts, at least they tell pollsters that, as Republicans are. But given that they have the votes for an Amy Coney Barrett in the Senate, and there's really no feasible way for Democrats to block it, I'm with you, Jake. Why not just acknowledge that this is the plan? Republicans will say they believe that this is a center-right country that supports their position on these policies, and if that's the case, it's surprising that not only would Pence not say it, but even recently President Trump has been trying to dodge this issue, trying to say he hasn't really talked to his court nominees about this issue, when you know that this is a central issue for Republicans when they're choosing these.
Because the gender gap right now isn't a gap; it's just a huge.
It's a chasm.
It's a chasm.
Yeah.
And that's A, and B, it's also the suburbs where they are bleeding votes in swing states all over the country, and as much as they are pretty, obvious about saying what they want, they also understand that this is the politics of the moment, and that's why they're pulling their punches.
Something else that both...
Just like nothing in history. Don't believe government officials or...
Obvious question, and a good question, which is, both of your running mates are in their 70s. Donald Trump 74, Joe Biden, I think 77. Have you talked to them about what needs to happen if you win and the senior citizen that you're running with needs to step down for health reasons or whatever? And neither of them answered the question.